So we're going to get into this book real quick, just to start off. This book is called The Pre-Columbian Discovery of America by the Northmen, illustrated by translations from the Icelandic sagas, edited with notes and a general introduction by B.F. da Costa. This is from 1868. Here we are in the general introduction to this book. And I want to show you guys something here that we already know, but this person is telling you straight up where the true old world is. And it says here, historic fancies. Before the plains of Europe, or even the peaks of Chomalari, rose above the primeval seas, the continent of America emerged from the watery waste that encircled the whole globe and became the scene of animate life. Again, before Europe, before there was even land over there. You guys understand what he's telling you? America already existed. And it was the scene of animate life. The so-called New World, all right? The so-called New World is in reality the old. This is the old world. How long have we been saying this? How long have we been proving this? How many more books we got to keep reading? You know, these books were never told to us. This is from the 1868 again. These people already knew that America was actually, in reality, the old and bears abundant proofs of a hoary age. But at what period it became the abode of man, we are unable even to conjecture. So again, they always try to see it in reverse, that people came over here, even though this is the oldest land. They don't know, or they don't want to admit. Down to the close of the 10th century of the Christian era, it had no written history. That's what they're saying here. We found so many old world inscriptions all over the Americas, right? Traces of a rude civilization that suggest a high antiquity are by no means wanton. Monuments and mounds remain that point to periods, the contemplation of which would cause Kronos himself to grow giddy. Yet among all these great and often impressive memorials, there is no monument, inscription, or sculptured frieze that solves the mystery of their origin. So that's according to him. Remember, you know, his limited research. Remember all the inscriptions we found here, all over the Americas. Tradition itself is dumb, and the theme chiefly kindles when brought within the realm of imagination. All right. So again, what did he say? The so-called New World is in reality the old. What does that match with? So again, we reference the most famous geologist, Louis Agassiz, and his book, Geological Sketches, which is part of the curriculum if you want to become a geologist in university and colleges. This is from 1866. I'm going to remind you what he said. Right on page 1 of chapter 1 in his book, he says, America, the old world. Again, firstborn among the continents, though so much later in culture and civilization than some of more recent birth. America, so far as her physical history is concerned, has been falsely denominated the New World. It has been falsely called the New World. This is not a new world. Why? Because hers was the first dry land lifted out of the waters. The oldest land on earth, guys, right here, America. Not Africa, not Mesopotamia, not any other place. It was here, corroborating with what that other book just said. Hers, the first shore washed by the ocean that enveloped all the earth beside. And while Europe was represented only by islands rising here and there above the sea, America already stretched an unbroken line of land from Nova Scotia to the far west. What is the Antillia Island was right here, the eastern part of North America. Remember, you guys put it all together. So going back to that other book, as you guys, as we just read, right? Again, I mean, just in case anybody's doubting this, before the plains of Europe again rose above the primeval seas, the continent of America emerged from the watery waste that encircled the whole globe and became the scene of animate life. The so-called New World is in reality the old and bears the abundant proofs of hoary age. And why am I repeating this before we start this video? It's because we're going to read a lot about, these so-called Europeans coming here, discovering America before Columbus, so-called Columbus. But in reality, they've been seeing it in reverse. These people knew of America because it was the true old world. Want to make sure you go back to even the mythological research that was done in that book we've been reading, the researchers into the lost history of America. He's telling you all that was right here. Again, so we continue in the book, The Pre-Columbian Discovery of America by the Northmen. This is from 1868 by B.F. de Costa. He says here, the Sea of Darkness. In early times, the Atlantic Ocean, like all things without known bounds, was viewed by man with mixed feelings of fear and awe. It was called the Sea of Darkness. Yet nevertheless, there were those who professed to have some knowledge of its extent and of what lay beyond. The earliest reference to this sea is that by Theopompus in the 4th century before the Christian era, given in a fragment of Aelian, where a vast island is described lying far in the west. Again, the Greeks, so-called Greeks, and all these Europeans of the classical or medieval times, now we're finding out they're probably from medieval times, a new chronology, right? Anatoly Fomenko. They knew of a large island or continent island, not just an island, but a continent, a vast one, lying in the west, far in the west, and peopled by strange races. Strange. To this we may add the reference of Plato to the island called Atlantis. That's all we're talking about. This is Atlantis, which lay west of the Pillars of Hercules, and which was estimated to be larger, listen to this, larger than Asia and Africa combined. So it's not just a little place in Mauritania, for all you guys who are still trying to be very Afrocentric and biased and still Pan-Africans trying to say, no, Kurimeo, you're wrong. Atlantis was in Mauritania. That's a little colony. That's a little place. That's not bigger than Asia and Africa combined. We're talking about big continent. Aristotle also thought that many other lands existed beyond the Atlantic. Plato supposed that the Atlantis was sunk by an earthquake, and Crantor says that he found the same account related by the priest of Sais 300 years after the time of Solon, from whom the grandfather of Critias had his information. Plato says that after the Atlantis disappeared, navigation was rendered too difficult to be attempted by the slime which resulted from the sinking of the land. Now remember, this is from Plato's writings and other people's writings in those classical or medieval times, where they're telling you that whatever happened, whatever cataclysm, whatever happened to parts of Atlantis, parts of America, and a lot of it going down and sinking, that caused the Atlantic to be very muddy. You couldn't penetrate it. You couldn't go through it. That's why when Plato tells the story of Atlantis, he says, in those times, the Atlantic was navigable, meaning that in his time, they couldn't cross it. This is what they're referencing here. Remember the previous videos we've done on this. It is probable that he had in mind the immense field of drifting seaweed found in that locality, and which Humboldt estimates to cover a portion of the Atlantic Ocean 6 times as large as all Germany. It is thought that Homer obtained the idea of his Elysium in the Western Ocean from the voyages of the Phoenicians, who, as is well known, sailed regularly to the British Islands. All right, again, where's the true old world? Where's the true Holy Land or Canaan? The biblical lands where so-called Phoenicians came out of. That was in America. They're seeing it in reverse. Yeah, Phoenicians, so-called Phoenicians. We're talking about seafarers possibly even a secret society of seafarers who had the knowledge of cartography and where lands were, and they kept it to themselves. A lot of those Phoenicians, guys, let's not generalize, it's not really like a nation. It was mixed nations, different peoples, which also included a lot of Israelites, like Danites and many other ones. They are also supposed by some to have pushed their discoveries as far as the western continent. They were from here. Cadiz, situated on the shore of Andalusia, was established by the Tyrians 12 centuries before the year of Christ. And when Cadiz, the ancient Gadir, was full 500 years old, a Greek trader, Kolios, there bought rare merchandise, a long and severe gale having driven his ships beyond the pillars of Hercules. All right, now again, I always want to remind you, if you're new to my channel, make sure to check out this research we've done on a book we've been reading again, Researches into the Lost History of America, also from the 1800s, 1884 to be exact, I believe, and where he breaks down how all these myths, these so-called Greek myths, when they're talking about Homer and Plato and all this stuff, they were literally talking about the Americas. We're talking about Kronos, Uranus, the Oceanides, the Titans, Prometheus, all that. It was right here in the Americas. All right. And we're not even finished with this book. We got 11 parts up so far. As you guys can see here, the evacuation of the Flight of the Gods heading over to Europe from America, Mount Olympus and the Allegheny Mountains. Come on now. The egg of the world, or the soul of the world, America. Oceanus is America. People by gods and giants. We just did another giant video. Okay? So put all the information, all the research together. Don't forget the previous information we've shown. Correlate that with what we're going to read today. Okay? Now, I also want to remind you of this video we did about 8 months ago. I was live. Atlantis, dwelling place of the gods, Enigma of Bimini, the De Soto expedition, and Antillia, the Antillia Island. You see right here on the right, guys, it's an actual depiction from old maps of Antillia, the island of Antillia. Antilles, the Antillia, which is part of Atlantis. All right. And as you guys can see, it's literally the eastern part of North America, from the Mississippi and Ohio River all the way to the Atlantic Ocean. You see Florida down here, the Gulf of Mexico, and the Susquehanna River on top, with all the bays, all the rivers that go into it, an exact match. So as I said here in chapter 3 of this book, and that's the cover of a book, it's called The Dwelling Place of the Gods, which we read in this video right here. It says medieval maps, and particularly nautical charts, are a fascination picturing as they do odds, bits of fact, and whimsy known best to mariners. On most of these medieval charts, islands in the Atlantic, of which historians find no documentary record, have been brushed aside as being purely mythological or non-existent. 3 of these so-called mythological islands persistently appear on early nautical charts of the Atlantic: St. Brendan or Brandini, Brazil or Brancilia, or High Brazil, right? And Antillia. Antillia. We're going to show an example of that. So as it says here, the earliest, this is a little further ahead in the book, the earliest suggestion of Antillia is on a chart believed to be that of Pisigano of 1367, guys. They're showing Antillia, and again, that was the eastern part of North America, from the Mississippi to the Atlantic, showing the Gulf of Mexico and the top of the Susquehanna River. Right, 1367, the earliest known chart showing the island and identifying it with the name Antillia is the nautical chart of 1424, the original of which is in the possession of the University of Minnesota, and which also may be attributed to the Pisigano family. Andrea Bianco has to this credit World Atlas of 1436. All right, so we're going to show that map. So right here, we're in the JCB library. Okay, this is a very scholarly website to find in sources. Also, it was called the John Carter Brown Library at Brown University. And As you guys can see, let me just move this real quick. It says accurate copy of a map in parchment of Andrea Bianco, a Venetian of 1436. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and zoom in. As you guys can see, hold on, right here. You see right here this is Antillia. Look under it. It says Antillia, or the Antilles Island. And again, right here, this is the Gulf of Mexico. This is Florida, the Mississippi and Ohio rivers, the Susquehanna on top, all the bays on the Atlantic Ocean. It's an exact match, guys, of the eastern part of North America. Do you guys see? Break the spell. Do you guys see? Break the spell. This map is preserved in the St. Mark's Library at Venice. All right, it's from 1436. Let me back up again so you guys can see. Over here is Europe, Spain, Africa, and then you cross the Atlantic and you reach Antillia. Antillia, which is literally the eastern part of North America. Let me go back to that image that I showed earlier. As you guys can see here to the right is the exact same island, and you guys see with the correct rivers and oceans to show you what it really is. As you guys can see, Atlantic Ocean, the Mississippi River, Ohio, the Gulf of Mexico, the Susquehanna River, with all the bays. You know, we read this book. It's called Atlantis, Dwelling Place of the Gods. If you guys want to go back to that video I did 8 months ago, you can see what book and the source, and he broke it down. You got the bays, you know, South Carolina and Georgia, you know, up in Maryland, all that. It's here. It's the exact same match of this map right here, guys. All right. It's the same one being depicted right here in this map from 1436. And again, as we read earlier, it even goes back to the 1300s. Antillia, right, which is related to Atlantis, Antillia. And they'll tell you in the description of this website, look, it says geographical description down here, a copy of the portion of chart of Europe or the Iberian Peninsula and Northern Africa. Also includes Atlantic islands such as the fictitious Antillia Island. The saying is fictitious. Of course, they're going to say it's fictitious, right? Now, let me zoom into this part. It says historical notes so you guys can see. It says the legend of Antillia or Antillia, also known as the Isle of Seven Cities, originated in an old Iberian legend about 7 bishops from the 8th century who fled Muslim conquerors by fleeing westward to the island. So listen to that. You see Muslim people fleeing, you know, the Catholics, even before the Inquisition, finding America, coming over here, right? Andrea Bianco included the island in his map of 1436, but it was omitted in his later map of 1448. The existence of the island on maps has been used for theories of pre-Columbian transoceanic contact, and some say may represent the American landmass. Okay? It is the American landmass. Come on, guys. Come on, guys. You know, you gotta dodge the hijack big time. They don't want you to know that people coming to the Americas before so-called Columbus, or that they knew of America before so-called Columbus. All right, so this was just side note. I'm gonna go back to that book we were reading, right? Okay, just trying to remind everybody, especially anybody viewing for the first time, some of the information we've gone over. We've gone over thousands of sources, hours and hours of research proving America's the old world. This is Atlantis. People came out of here, went into Europe, into Africa, into Asia. Okay? All right, so we go back to the book, right? The Pre-Columbian Discovery of America by the Northmen, illustrated by translations from the Icelandic sagas. This is written by B.F. de Costa. This is from 1868. Now, de Costa, we've shown the Costa family being Sephardic Jews, people of color. They were even black slave owners in Louisiana and even in the East Coast, the de Costa family. Yes, again, catch up on the research we've done in the last 8 years. Now, this book continues. They were trying to prove that the Phoenicians had traveled here and all that, but they were seen in reverse. That's why I didn't read all that. I'm just going to keep reading what they're saying here. It says, traditions. There was even a tradition that America was visited by Saint Columba and also by the Apostle Saint Thomas, who penetrated even as far as Peru. Again, they see it in reverse, possibly. This opinion is founded on the resemblance existing between the certain rites and doctrines which seem to have been held in common by Christians and the early inhabitants of Mexico. Now, they're calling them Christians, but again, it's way more ancient than when Christianity came out, so they're seen in reverse. The first Spanish missionaries were surprised to find that Mexicans bowing in adoration before the figure of the cross. So we had the symbol of the cross here, right? And inferred that these people were of Christian origin. Now listen to what he says. Yet the inference has no special value when we remember that Christianity is far less ancient than the symbol of the cross. All right? That's way older than Christianity, which also existed among the Egyptians and other ancient people. What Egyptians? Ancient Egypt was here, guys. All right? We've proven that too. Continues, says, claims have also been made for the Irish. Broughton brings forward a passage in which St. Patrick is represented as sending missionaries to the Isles of America. Okay? And that's from the Monasticum Britannicum, if you look down here. Right? That was written. They were sent missionaries to America. Pages 131 to 132 and then 187 to 188. The fact that the word America is here used seems quite sufficient to upset the legend. All right? They knew Amaracapana, remember the origin of America, is not from Vespucci. His name was Albert. We've broken this down. Now, another claim has been urged of a more respectable character, which is supported by striking, though not conclusive, allusions in the Chronicles of the North, in which a distant land is spoken of as Ireland the Great, or Great Ireland, or Greater Ireland. Come on now, this is what we're talking about today, right? The Irish in the early times might easily have passed over to the Western continent, for which voyage they undoubtedly had the facilities. And Professor Rafinsky, after alluding to the well-known fact that the Northmen were preceded in Iceland by the Irish, says that it is by no means improbable that the Irish should also have anticipated them in America. So-called Irish. Who are the Irish? Who settled Ireland? Where were they coming from? Remember, our geography is messed up. Our chronologies are messed up. A lot of those so-called early Irish were coming out of the true old world. Who are the Picts? Who are the Celts? Who are the Druids? Remember all the stuff we found here resembling all these ancient people and a more classical version of their writing, Ogham and all that, here in America. Again, catch up on the research we've done. The Irish were a seafaring people and have been assigned a Phoenician origin by Moore and others who have examined the subject. All right. Okay, we can go with that. So again, who were the Phoenicians, so-called Phoenician seafarers, coming out of the true Holy Land, America? If this is so, the tradition would appear to be somewhat strengthened. Even as early as the year 296, the Irish are said to have invaded Denmark with a large fleet. In 396, Nell made a descent upon the coast of Lancashire with a considerable navy, where he was met by the so-called Romans. Is it really from the years 300 or medieval times? Remember, our chronologies are false. Stilicho, whose achievements were celebrated by Claudian in the days of Roman occupation of England. At that period, the Irish were in most respects in advance of the Northmen, not yet having fallen into decline and quite as likely as any people then existing to brave the dangers of an ocean voyage. The Icelandic documents possibly referring to the Irish will be given in their proper place. And in the meanwhile, it need only to be added that the quotation given by Beamish from such an authority as the Turkish spy will hardly tend to strengthen their claims, especially where its author, John Paul Marana, says that in Mexico, listen to this, the British language is so prevalent. The British language, what is the British language? What is that old British language? Is so prevalent in Mexico that the very towns, bridges, beasts, birds, rivers, hills, etc. are called by their British or Welsh names. In truth, as the wishes so often father to the thought, it would be an easy task to find resemblance in the languages of the Aborigines to almost any language that is spoken in our day. All right? Now, that reminds me of something, guys. I want you guys to go ahead and go watch these videos if you haven't. Make sure to go check out this playlist. It's just 3 videos. We read a whole book called Prehistoric and Protohistoric Comparative Philology, a study of languages. America had all the Old World languages. He shows how they relate to many of the Old World languages, how many people in different parts of the world speak almost the same dialect as in the ancient Americans, a lot of the nations in ancient America. All right, go check this series out. Again, guys, don't forget the research we've done. You got to put it all together. And this is why, a lot of you are new or just don't watch all my videos and then you come. Why are you trying to make everything into America? Why are you being biased? You're so pseudo, you're lying. And then a lot of people just have a hard time understanding all the research we've done and why I say what I say. And what we're reading today is going to literally is corroborating what we've already know, what we've already learned. Okay? All right, so we go back into the book, The Pre-Columbian Discovery of America by the Northmen. This is by B.F. de Costa from 1868. And they're using, again, translations from the Icelandic sagas. So this part of the introduction still of this book is telling you the colonization of Iceland. In the cold North Sea, a little below the Arctic Circle, lay a great island. As early as the year 860, it has been made known to the Northmen by the Dane or Swedish descent named Gerdar. So Danite, Dane, Vikings, Northmen, North tribe, who called it Gardar's Island. And 4 years later by the pirate Nadad, who sailed thither in 864 and called it Snowland. Presenting in the main the form of an irregular ellipse, this island occupies an area of about 137 square miles, affording the dual diversity of valleys without verdure and mountains without trees. Desolation has their fixed abode. It broods among the dells and looks down upon the gloomy fjords. The country is treated with streams and dotted with tarns, yet the geologists find but little evidence in the structure of the earth to point to the action of water. All right, so just some info real quick. I'm going to keep going ahead. It was towards this land, which the settlers called Iceland, that the proud Norwegian Jarl turned his eyes, and there he resolved to found a home. The first settler was Ingolf. He approached the coast in the year 875, threw overboard his seat post, and waited to see them touch the land. But in this he was disappointed, and those sacred columns carved with the images of the gods drifted away from sight. He nevertheless landed on a pleasant promontory at the southeastern extremity of the island, and built his habitation on the spot, which is called Ingolfsholti to this day. So, yes, we're not arguing that possibly Danes, Swedish people, or people from Europe ended up, during these times, or maybe even Middle Ages, in Iceland and Greenland and over to New England, right? But this is after. They're going to tell you right here. But the first settlers did not find this barren country entirely destitute of human beings. So they're not the first people there. Ari Frodi, than whom there is no higher authority, says, then were here Christian people from the Northmen called Papas, but they afterwards went away, because they would not be here among heathen, and left behind them Irish books and bells and croziers, from which it could be seen that they were Irishmen. They were Irishmen, He repeats substantially the same thing in the Landnámabók. What is the Landnámabók? The authority of which no one acquainted with the subject will question, adding that books and other relics were found in that island of Papay and Papili, and that the circumstances also mentioned in English books. The English writings referred to are those of the Venerable Bede. This is also stated in an edition of King Olaf Tryggvason saga, made near the end of the 14th century. All right, so real quick, we're going to get into Great Ireland, guys. So this is just a little, we're going ahead a little bit here, but hold on. Just want to read this real quick. It says Great Ireland, also known as White Man's Land, or the snow place, a place of whiteness or pureness, or land of the white people. So what does that mean? If people from Europe are calling this white man's land, then I'm going to assume that Europe was not white man's land, but it was a swarthy land, right? If they're calling America or these places, white man's land, then are we really talking about complexion? Because I thought Europeans were white. Why would they call that white man's land? What about them? Aren't they from white man's land? Aren't they from Europe? Think about that, all right? So that's what I'm saying. We got to dodge the hijack a little bit. And in Latin, similarly as Hibernia Major and Albania was a land said by various Norsemen to be located near Vinland. Remember, Vinland was in New England. I'm going to read that today. In one report in the saga of Eric the Red, some Skrællingar captured in Markland described the people in what was supposedly white man's land to have been dressed in white garments. Oh, so you mean the clothing they were wearing, uttered loud cries and bore long poles and wore fringes. Remember who wore fringes? Who wore fringes? We're in the 1611 King James Bible, and we go to Numbers 15:38. What did Most High say to Moses to tell the children of Israel? He said, "Speak unto the children of Israel, and bid them that they make them fringes in the borders of their garments throughout their generations, and that they put upon the fringe of the borders a ribbon of blue." So who was wearing fringes? The children of Israel. It was commanded by the Most High. Fringes. Just like the people they found in so-called white man's land or Vinland or Great Ireland, they wore fringes, right? Remember that, fringes. So in the Wikipedia page of Great Ireland, it still says mythical origins. Celtic folklore tells of a mythical land across the Western Ocean, often referred to as the Celtic otherworld. Just like, the sun sets in the west, right? And it becomes dark. It goes into the dark, and they saw it as the sun going into the underworld, just like Amenti in Egypt, when they were talking about the Americas, just like dolphins, emerald tablets, or anything like that. There was the underworld, or the Celtic otherworld, as known as On or Avalon, among other names. The Byzantine scholar Procopius of Caesarea described the otherworld of the ancient Gauls and said it was located west of Britain. Plutarch, in a chapter from the Moralia called Concerning the Face, which appears in the orb of the moon, describes a land called Ogygia. Remember Ogygia and that other book we've been reading, Researches into the Lost Histories of America? That was all related to America. That was 5 days sail from Britain, and that the Celtic natives also knew of 3 other lands equal distance from Ogygia, and from each other in the direction of the setting sun, including a great continent and land of Kronos. Come on now. Didn't we already prove this? Kronos was in America. The land of Kronos was in America. Look how that correlates with the Celtic legends or myths. And from the ancient era until the early Christian historical era, geographers referred to the waters beyond Iceland as the Cronian Sea. Come on now. Man, you guys remember, we've done the research. Reference this playlist where we're reading that book, Researches into the Lost History of America, again, where we showed that Kronos, Oceanos, and all that was dealing with America, a real person, or a geography referring to America, just like in the Celtic legends. Irish documents called Imrama from the 6th and 7th centuries supposedly record the adventures of Irish priests in the Western Ocean, while other folkloric stories tell of the Atlantic voyages of St. Brendan and King Arthur. Or we just talking about Prester John, often considered mythical. Gerardus Mercator refers to a Jacob Snoyen, who had learned that 8 men returned to Norway from an expedition to the Arctic Islands in 1364, in a letter to John Dee, 1577, stating specifically that the 8 men who came to Norway in 1364 were not survivors of a recent expedition, but descended from the colonists who had settled in the distant lands several generations earlier and claimed to be descendants of King Arthur's expeditions. The following is translation taken from Mercator's 1569 polar map. So This is what they're translating right here if you want to pause it. And I just want to remind you about Mercator's map, right? I'm going to remind you about something here. This is a copy of Mercator's map from 1569. And I'm going to show you that right over like the Southwest US and Mexico, it literally says India, all right? Literally says India. Let me show you guys. Do you guys see that? India. Right here. India. India, I'm going to show you a close-up of that. Here's another version, as you guys can see, India, right? India, La California, Hispanova, India. India. Here's another view of it. You guys see India? India, right? India. India. India superior, right? India. Now, when you go to India's etymology, right? etymonline.com, it's telling us that the Indian subcontinent, Central Asia, south of the Himalayas, right? We know that, right? Formerly sometimes used generally for Asia. For Asia, huh? So it was actually all of Asia once. But where is the true Asia? Asia Superior or Major Asia. Now, one important thing here is that India, the one we know today, as you guys can see in the bottom, from 1947 in reference to the Republic of India. That's when Hindustan of Bharat, Turan, that region of the world was actually called India. So in 1569, right, when Mercator is calling this part India, and this is southwestern Mexico, he wasn't talking about another India or India Nova, like saying New India, because there wasn't no old India. That India is from 1947, the one we know today. Columbus wasn't lost, remember? He didn't call the Indians Indians because he thought he was in Hindustan. He would have called them Hindus, not Indians. So make it make sense, because the country India didn't get its name till 1947. Did you guys even know that? Now, talking about this, they said India was another name for Asia, literally. What Asia? This is a map from 1506, credited to Bartholomew Columbus, Columbus' son, or Alessandro Sorsi. Alessandro Sorsi, you guys can see the name right here. And why this is popular, because it actually shows Central America, it shows Costa Rica, it shows the South America, and it shows North America as Asia. Asia Major, Asia, or Serica, America, Arica, Erica, America, Serica. All right, we broke this down in that book too, Research into the Lost History of America. They mentioned this, that these series, Serica, and all these places were in America. Okay, you guys can see here. Let me just show you another image. Shout out to my Telegram friends. Now it says here, Bartholomew Columbus sketched 3 maps in the margin of a letter written by his brother Christopher in Jamaica on July 7, 1503, to the Spanish sovereigns, pleading for the restoration of his honor and fortune. The maps cover the territory from Asia, that is, the American continent. Again, the maps cover the territory from Asia, that is, the American continent on the west to China on the east, and generally between the 2 tropics. Some believe that the map attributed to Bartholomew Columbus was actually drawn by Alessandro Sorsi. The map portrayed on the left stamp covers the coast of Central America, Colombia, and Venezuela. Asia clearly indicates that even at this time, he still believed he had reached the Orient. He's calling North America Asia, guys. Come on, man. So what do you mean India was in general the name of Asia? What Asia? You see? It's always been talking about this land, so-called Atlantis, America, this mythical lands, the farthest east, right, where Marco Polo went. So on this map, Serica means China. Serica, just add an A-M right after, before the S, you get America, right? Serica, Erica, America. Serica, America means China. Cerisi Montes means Chinese mountains. And Veragua means Veragua, Panama. Katigara is port in India, right? India. and the interrupted coastline indicates an isthmus leading to the Cygnus Magnus. So let me see if I can zoom in some more. Gonna get a little blurry, but this is an actual stamp from Costa Rica, and you guys can see it says Asia. This is Florida right here. This is Central America, and this is South America. This is from 1506. Okay, 1506. It says the map on the stamp on the right is identified as map of CR, Costa Rica from the 16th century with no identification who created it. All right, it might be an old map that they both copied, an old map. And again, showing America as Asia. Okay? So going back to the Wikipedia page about Great Ireland, you know, that's how we got to the Mercator's map. They were talking about it here, right? It says here, the Landnámabók, according to the Landnámabók, Ari Marson discovered the land 6 days sailing west of Ireland. This journey is thought to have occurred around the year 983. Their son was Ari, who drifted to White Man's Land, which some people call Greater Ireland. It lies in the ocean to westward near Vinland the Good, said to be a 6-day sail from Ireland. Ari could get away and was baptized there. This story was first told by Haralfn Limerick Farred, who spent a long time at Limerick in Ireland. And Tortor Gellison quoted some islanders who had heard Earl Thorfinn of Orkney say that the Ari had been recognized in White Man's Land and couldn't get away from there, but was thought of very highly. All right, so Landnámabók, and that's again, and here we have a English translation of Landnámabók, or the Book of Settlements, translated by Hernan Paulson and Paul Edwards. Says here, up until the present time, the old Icelandic Landnámabók has been practically unknown beyond the relatively limited circle of those who possess the ability to read Old Icelandic. Scholars with special philological training and Icelanders whose native language is still essentially that of their ancient forebears. It will be a source of satisfaction and pleasure to those who value this work that is now being made available in the new translation. All right, so somebody translated it for us. The world of Landnámabók still lives vibrantly in the poetry and sagas of medieval Iceland, a great deal of which has already been made available to the English-speaking public in translation, not least of all by the admirable work of the present translators. It is most fitting, therefore, that they should now put their pen to the text about which 19th century Icelandic scholars once said that the loss of this work alone would in some respects have weighed more heavily for the history of his country than all of the other sagas together, all right? So I'll kind of get a background of this, right? It says Iceland was the last country in Europe to become inhabited. And we know more about the beginnings and early history of Icelandic society than we do of any other in the old world. So again, remember we just read in the other book, The Pre-Columbian Discovery of America by the Northmen, that Iceland was not empty. It had people already. Okay? The Book of Settlements is our chief source tracing the discovery of Iceland by the Scandinavians and the emergence of the Icelandic nation during the Viking period. While Scandinavian raiders were plundering in England, Scotland, and Ireland, a number of farmers and peasants set sail from Norway and Western Isles for this new land to build a new society for themselves and their children as late as 860 AD. All right, so just so you guys can get a background. If you want to read this, go ahead. I just want you guys to have a background where there's a lot of proven history that definitely there was, you know, awareness of Iceland, Greenland, and New England when it came to people of the British Isles or the northern people of Norway, Denmark, Sweden, you know, the so-called Danes, Vikings, and all that, right? The Welsh. Now, I know I'm all over the place. Hopefully you guys are keeping up. Just want to basically cover a lot. There's a lot of background first to understand before we get to the actual, you know, where Great Ireland really was. There's a lot to understand. There's a lot of research we've gone over. I'm trying to do a crash course here just to refresh everybody and also all the new people. Right here, we're at the David Rumsey Map Collection. Really great website for maps, old maps. And what we're going to be looking at is this literally a flat Earth map. This might be the most actual, more accurate projection of our globe, right? This is from Monte Urbano or Monte Urbano from 1587, okay? 1587. It says composite map of the first ring of 4 sheets around the North Pole, the second ring of 8 sheets, the third 12. All right, so this is a real map from 1587. All right, they don't be showing us this. I'm going to zoom into it, right? Showing us America right here, right? Surrounded by a wall. And it's not no ice, it's ice-free. It's ice-free. This is 1587. And what do we see? We see South America literally touching, you know, the Tierra del Fuego. Shout out to Drop 42, the Drop Radio. He's been covering this so much. We know that Australia or Australios literally meant southern continent. It wasn't just the continent we know today as Australia. Anything in the south was called Australia. Even this area right here that touches South America, you know, Tierra del Fuego. How can this be Tierra del Fuego, which means land of fire in Spanish, if it's supposed to be covered with ice? But look, it has animals. You know, there's rivers, mountains, all over this wall, right? All over this wall that surrounds the earth, all right? But what I wanted to show, you know, I'm showing this because this is a better reference, I would say, of the globe. We also got another example. We'll come back to this. I just want to show you guys, right? We have the, in the Digital Commonwealth Massachusetts collections online, as you guys can see, it's called Gleason's Map, or New Standard Map of the World, on the projection of J.S. Christopher Modern College, Blackheath, England, scientifically and practically correct as it is, surrounded now with an ice wall. All right, this is more modern, I believe from late 1800s. Okay, this is what the Navy, this is what the Army uses, this is what navigators use. They don't go off a fake globe map. This is what they use. Where's Antarctica? Where's Antarctica in this map? New Standard Map of the World, as it is. Longitude and time calculator on the projection of Modern College. Scientifically and practically correct. Okay? Starts to hijack with your globe and you're spinning on a ball. All right? Going back to the Monte Urbano map from 1587, right? What do we have here? We have Ireland right here, right? We have Friesland and then Iceland, look. And then where we got, so Greenland is kind of missing. This is probably, Friesland actually is Iceland, and Icelandia, as they're calling Greenland here, is actually Greenland. So when they talk about Iceland, are they really talking about Greenland? Now, look how close these places are. So you got Ireland right here, the British Isles, right? Irlanda, as you guys can see. Look at Brazil, the mythical land they were talking about, right? The mythical land, Brazil, or High Brazil. Look at it right here to the west. So you got all these places so close to each other. You're saying these people never went to the Americas? They're so close. They could have just gone island hopping, right? They could have even traveled on this ice-free Arctic. Ice-free Arctic. Look at that. The center. Ice-free. There's land there. And then they're calling Canada up here Terra Incognita, or unknown land. Unknown land, huh? Terra de Labrador, Newfoundland, Labrador, right? Are you saying people weren't going back and forth? Are you really saying people weren't going back and forth and that it was actually Europeans who discovered America? These Vikings, you're seeing it in reverse. Remember, what is the oldest land coming out of the waters? We read that in the beginning of this video. America has the oldest land. So you're saying this part right here, which is, they were talking about the Laurentian Mountains, which is, let's see if I can, there we go. This whole area, right? This whole area is one of the oldest lands, is the oldest lands on Earth. Going down into the Appalachian Mountains, we got the oldest forests, right? Near Catskill, New York. Cairo, New York. We got the oldest fossils, the oldest water. Many of the oldest things right here in this same region. We've got a video on that, so go check that out. Again, so much research we've done, right? Going back the other way, we got Europe right here. You're saying all these people weren't traveling? Of course they were. Of course they were. And touch the hijack with your globe map. This is a more exact scientifically and practically correct map, as we just read in the Gleason's map from later on. And look, we have an Antarctica who is ice-free. We have ice-free, and we even got Prester John here. Look at the El Gran Prester Juan, Prester John, a melanated man, so-called black. We're talking about King David. Prester John was King David, living in the Middle Ages. King David, right? Look at the ice-free, what now is called an ice wall, but it wasn't always ice back then. Look at that. There's animals, rivers. He mapped this. Do you think he just made all this up, this guy from 1587? All right. So we're going to talk about, so you're saying people went from this way to America, right? First, and you're saying America was uninhabited? Come on now. The first land out of the waters was uninhabited. Now we're going to read another book real quick. And we're going to talk about the ocean currents. All right. So we go back in the book, The American Discovery of Europe. The other day we just read chapter 1 fully. You guys know literally what we read there. Columbus knew he was going to so-called Asia or Cathay or India. He wasn't lost. Why? Because he had met American Indians in the 1470s in Ireland, in Galway. That's literally true history. He wasn't lost. He knew there was American Indians. He knew there was a land on the other side. And he called it Asia. He called it Cathay. Cipango, Drop has shown the map. Shout out to 432 the Drop. All right. We're going to read quickly from chapter 2 when it comes into the ocean currents. Let's hear the Gulf Stream in Galway, ocean currents and American visitors. It really isn't very surprising that Columbus met Americans at Galway circa 1477 for two reasons. First, because Galway is directly reached by the great North Atlantic Ocean currents and winds coming from the Americas. Again, coming from the Americas. And second, because Galway has for ages been a natural bay and port, having direct communication with the Mediterranean world, Spain, and Portugal. Ocean currents, rivers, and the sea have played an important role in history, especially in terms of the migration of plants, animals, and humans. The currents are also vital parts of the knowledge of any seagoing people, since the currents and prevailing winds that usually accompany them are exceedingly important factors in determining who goes where and who gets to return alive when the sea is the highway of travel. In essence, modern European navigation in the Atlantic and European expansion had to wait for the Portuguese to learn how to utilize the winds and currents of the Atlantic to their advantage. This knowledge enabled the Portuguese to sail to the Azores and Newfoundland. Newfoundland, right? Vinland, Newfoundland, to India, and to Brazil. And when transferred, it enabled the Spanish, French, English, and Dutch to follow a path of transatlantic trade and empire building. I think that we can make a very good case that Native American navigators were very familiar with the crucial significance of currents and winds, since there is virtually no better place to learn about them than in the Caribbean region. Moreover, knowledge of currents and winds would have been expected of most eastern seaboard Native Americans, as well as the Inuits of Greenland and Newfoundland people. Before analyzing the navigational knowledge of Americans, however, let us examine the rivers of the Atlantic, right? They literally, some say these are underground rivers, the original rivers, before the oceans went up. What we see at first glance are two great circular rivers in the Atlantic Ocean. The northern circle running in a clockwise direction from its southern equatorial edge, and the southern circle flowing in a counter-clockwise direction, with a smaller counter-equatorial current in between, running easterly toward Africa. In reality, these great rivers sometimes swirl off into eddies and meanders, nonetheless maintaining a steady push in the dominant direction when considered overall. The trade winds provide the initiating thrust for the system of currents in the North and South Atlantic. They drive the water between the tropical regions from Africa towards America, producing the equatorial current. This westward drift shifts from the north to south with the seasons of the year. Between the areas of the northern and southern trade winds, there is a region of equatorial calms, And in this area, there is a countercurrent that runs eastward, sometimes with considerable velocity, toward the Bight of Biafra. Although it is possible to argue that the western moving equatorial current begins of Africa, in fact, the current connects directly with currents flowing southward from the North Atlantic, the end of the northern clockwise circle, and northward from the South Atlantic, all right, the end of the counterclockwise circle, southern circle. So both currents ending in the Americas, literally is what he's telling you, not in Africa and not starting in Africa. The equatorial current moves straight across the Atlantic toward the Antilles Islands and the South American coast, but the greater force of the southern equatorial current is deflected northward by the coast of Brazil, since it hits the coast north of Cape St. Roque, so that the part of the current going along the Guiana coast, which by then also includes Amazon River water, eventually squeezes between Trinidad and Tobago and gradually joins with the northern equatorial current, which has passed through the Antilles. The current along the Guiana coast, called the Guiana Current, says here, acquires a greatly augmented rate, running ordinarily at the rate of from 30 to 50 miles, and occasionally at a rate of 80 miles in the 24 hours. Entering the Caribbean Sea, it is reinforced by the portion of the equatorial current which flows in between the Lesser Antilles, and it then passes westward along the northern coast of South America until it is deflected northward by the coastline of Central America and driven between the peninsula of Yucatan and the western extremity of Cuba into the Gulf of Mexico at the rate of from 30 to 60 miles per day. The current then divides into two streams, both of which converge along the northern coast of Cuba, where they also combine with part of the northern equatorial current that has run northwesternly to the north coast of Cuba. Thus combined, the Gulf Stream or Florida current, right? The Gulf Stream or the Florida current then shoots northward along the coast of Florida through the Florida Channel, sometimes reaching speeds of 4 to 7 nautical miles per hour, but averaging overall about 48 miles per day. On average, a mass of water equally to 25 times as much water as all the rivers of the world carry is forced through the narrows of Bimini at a rate of 10 cubic miles per hour. The Gulf Stream then runs along the eastern seaboard of North America. Again, where? Through the eastern seaboard. We're going to show images of this, right? Of North America as far as Cape Hatteras, being separated from the coast by a band of cold water that has a north to south current. At Cape Hatteras, the stream turns gradually eastward in the form of a fan. Its three warm bands spreading out over the Atlantic surface to an aggregate breadth of 167 miles, whilst two cold bands of an aggregate breadth of 52 miles are interposed between them. The innermost warm band is the one which exhibits the highest temperatures and greatest rate of flow, its velocity being greatest where it is pressed on laterally by the Arctic current, so that a rate of 4 miles per hour is occasionally observed. The southern portions of the above currents were discussed by Pedro Martyr as early as 1515, having first been described by Native Americans to Spanish visitors. They the ones who taught them, listen, and then encountered by various captains and pilots from the mid-1490s onward. Benjamin Franklin was much interested in the Gulf Stream as it passed along the North American coast near Nantucket. A Captain Timothy Folger told him, around 1786, "We are well acquainted with the stream because in our pursuits of whales, which kept to the sides of it, but are not met within it, we run along the side and frequently cross it to change our side. And in crossing it, have sometimes met it spoke with those packets ships who were in the middle and steaming it. We have informed them that they were steaming a current that was against them to the value of 3 miles an hour, and advised them to cross it. But they were too wise to be counseled by simple American fishermen. The Gulf Stream is sometimes called the North Atlantic Current, east of Sandy Hook, and south of the Grand Banks of Newfoundland." Where? Newfoundland, right? Remember, Vinland. This is where these so-called sagas, these people going into Greenland and Iceland from Europe, ended up in Newfoundland, right? But the current is what they're trying to tell you here. It actually goes the opposite way. It's a lot stronger going the opposite way, going towards Europe. where it turns due eastward across the Atlantic. According to some observers, the stream loses all its special attributes as to be no longer recognizable to the east of the meridian of 30 degrees west long, there degenerating into the general easterly drift of that region of the Atlantic, which is kept up by the prevalence of westerly winds, where the Florida current or true Gulf Stream can last be recognized. It is there flowing almost due east, at a rate which would require about 100 days to bring it to the land's end. England! That's where it brings you. What, guys, if you get stuck in this current from Jamaica, listen, this Gulf Stream current, if you get stuck on it, you don't even need paddles, paddles or anything. It'll bring you, if you have sails, it'll literally bring you to the British Isles. The same author argues that the transport of trunks of trees, drift timber, fruits, shells, etc., to the Western Hebrides, the Orkney, Shetland, and Faroe Islands, and the coast of Norway may be fairly set down to the surface drift sustained by the prevalence of southwest winds. Prevalence, and even the winds are much stronger going that way. And where do they bring you to? The coast of Norway, right? Scandinavians supposedly came this way, but again, they've been telling us history in reverse, is what I'm trying to show you here. So it's very important to understand and to understand that Great Ireland or Greater Ireland was here in the Americas, meaning the original. Another authority knows that the stream continues on across the North Atlantic at 1 or 2 knots speed. The force of the current diminishes as we go east across the Atlantic, and on reaching Europe, the more diffuse stream splits. Part must follow the wheel-like circulation of the whole North Atlantic body of water, while a segment reaches up to the trail around Scotland, finally to die out around the approaches to the Spitsbergen. On the way, this latter stream of warmish water gives solace to the northwest Scottish coast, providing palm trees at Ullapool and pleasant warmth at Oban. You guys hear that? The author then goes on to discuss seeds, plants, and animal life carried by the Gulf Stream to the west coast of Ireland and elsewhere, which we will discuss below in connection with other evidence of the impact of the Gulf Stream North Atlantic current on communication. A very well-informed authority, Henry Stommel, states that the North Atlantic current, which appears to be made up of a number of separate streams, eddies, or branches, exactly which we do not yet know, is often obscured by a shallow, wind-driven surface movement called the North Atlantic Drift, which varies from time to time depending upon the winds. This then may be the reason that some other writers are not certain about the nature of the Gulf Stream's extension eastward. For our purpose, however, it is only necessary to stress that the winds from the west and the current both flow in an eastward direction, thus taking drifting boats or other floating objects directly toward Ireland and Europe, right from America, sometimes at great speed, as we shall see. Not all objects drift northward to Ireland and Scotland, however, since part of the North Atlantic current or drift swings in a southeasterly direction toward the shores of France, Spain, and Portugal. But literally, it's bringing you to that side, right? And beyond, to the Madeira, Canary Islands, Cabo Verde, Cape Verde, and eventually as the North Equatorial current back to the Antilles and Caribbean. And here's a little image of what they're showing you guys. So you guys can see the lines going up, splitting all the way into those areas of the British Isles, Norway, Greenland, and to the Iberian Peninsula, and then into Africa, and then back around, back around. All right? One has to visualize the route of the Gulf Stream North Atlantic current system as faster moving rim around a hub of more slowly rotating warm water of the central North Atlantic known as the Sargasso Sea in its southwestern sector. This huge water mass is the North Atlantic Central Water, and it occupies the upper 1,000 meters of central regions of North Atlantic and takes part in the wind-driven surface circulation, which gives rise to the Gulf Stream. Later, Stommel states that the central North Atlantic Ocean is covered to a depth of about 700 meters with a layer of warm water, slowly drifting toward the southwest, from Europe, under the combined influence of the stress of the wind and the Earth's rotation. Gosh, the hijack. We just showed you a flat map, right? And the ones they use in the Navy and Army, the Gleason map. It is bounded by the Gulf Stream to the west, a narrow, intense northeastward flowing current, which returns to the north again, the southward driven Sargasso Sea water that has passed through the Caribbean and has turned north through the Florida Straits. The Gulf Stream, as it turns toward the east near the Grand Banks, acts as a kind of dynamic barrier or dam that forces the warm, slower moving water to its south, pursuing a clockwise rotation by preventing it from overflowing the colder water to the north of the stream. The significance of this, all right, pay attention to this part, for our purposes, and this is what I'm trying to tell you, they're seeing it in reverse. It's not that people came here and built Great Ireland or built all these magnificent cities and then left and then disappeared, or built these pyramids, right? Is that Americans caught up in a storm might well end up in the Azore Islands if they became caught up in one of the more inner eddies of the stream, or they might reach the west coast of Spain or Portugal, right? So-called Phoenicians following the currents coming from the true Holy Land, Iberia, right? Remember all the research, even with the research we learned about Jeremiah and the queen's daughters leaving, so-called Egypt, or even the gypsies leaving so-called Egypt, Egyptians, America, ending up over there, right? Because they rode this current. It's so much easier, guys. So if they miss Spain and Portugal, in both cases, missing in both cases Ireland and Southwest England, there is evidence that both scenarios took place, as we shall see later on. The Gulf Stream, after it leaves the Caribbean at least, is not a rich feeding ground for most fish or whales, as noted by Franklin. It is too warm to encounter the kind of fish which are main catch of North Atlantic waters. And as Pickard noted during his submarine voyage in the Gulf Stream, there was an unexpected dearth of animal life, at least from Florida to Cape Hatteras. On the other hand, some tropical species such as flying fish are brought northward, along with a massive seaweed, by the stream. Now remember, this seaweed we read earlier is what possibly was played with them. We're talking about there's a part that was impenetrable. Look how it discorrelates with what we were just reading earlier about that massive seaweed by the stream, including jellyfish. It also plays a critical role in the migration of young eels from the eel breeding grounds in the Sargasso Sea to the east of Bermuda, taking them to the rivers and freshwater ponds of Ireland and other parts of Europe. It is thought that the eels reaching eastern North America are 1-year-olds. Those reaching Ireland are 3-year-olds, while those reaching Scandinavia and the Mediterranean are 5 years old. All right, reaching where? Scandinavia, in reverse. So if animals, seaweed, plants, all this stuff was doing the same, humans did the same, guys. So when they're saying, oh, the Scandinavians were the first to discover America, you might be seeing it in reverse. They might have already gone over there first, and then they're coming back. That's what I'm trying to tell you, coming back. They knew it was here. So here's another image, right? As you can see, it's a lot stronger where the darker is. See that dark part right here where my arrow is, if you can see it? That's where the current is the strongest. Heading over that way to Europe, to West Africa, right? Covering almost all of the Americas from the northern part of South America, going up Central America, through Cuba, under Florida, up the East Coast, and into Europe, back again, okay? United States Navy observers flying 500 feet above the Gulf Stream reported, repeatedly we have noticed large schools of fish swimming just inside the wall in the warm water, including tuna and blues. One time we spotted a herd of some 200 sea turtles swimming south, again just inside the warm water layer. Along this interface One also finds thousands of birds and lumber on just one flight. We must have spotted enough lumber to build a couple of skyscrapers. Every stick of it caught just at the interface. This is very significant because human travelers, especially those who were used to following fish schools and studying the patterns of the sea, could have maintained both good speed and adequate food by following the interface zone along the west and north edges of the stream. So this reminds me, we have a lot of videos on the ancient navigators of America and how people left from here navigating on ships and all that. And how the Indians, how they would know that there is a current is because they started following the turtles. There's stories of them telling, yeah, we followed the turtles going somewhere, and they followed them, ended up in Europe. Yeah, ancient Americans. Now let us examine some of the evidence relating to the carrying of objects from America to Europe and even onto Africa. Into Africa. Into, not out of. Into. Empty your cup if you haven't yet. One contemporary author, William H. McLeish, visited the vicinity of Galway Bay to find that viable American seeds had arrived in that area, including ones responsible for a variety of orchid and the pipewort. But what brought the American pipewort? Close by Dogs Bay. And one pool grew unimposing stems with primitive heads poking above the surface, a few inches of miracle. Pipewort does not belong here, yet it grows here. All right, that's native to the Americas. How did it get there? I walked Dogs Bay Beach, where one finds sea hearts and other visitors from the west after equinoctial storms. Another writer, T.F. Gaskell, tells us about the beans that arrived on the west coast of Ireland and Scotland. They arrived from Jamaica. Listen, more about which later. These sea beans were noted on the Norwegian coast as early as 1751 by Eric Pontoppidan, who wrote, "It is of the size of a chestnut, obicular, jet flat, or as it were compressed on both sides. Its color is dark brown, yet in the middle, at the junction of the shells, it is variegated with a circle of shining black, and close by that another of lively red, which have a very pretty effect." Pontoppidan thought the beans could be from a sea plant or from an Indian vegetable of the tribe called Pedunculus elephantinus, as to bring in this vegetable from the opposite coast of America, whence wood and the like are known to be driven toward Iceland. Again, toward Iceland. So remember, they said they found people in Iceland, these early sagas, these Europeans, these so-called Danes, Swedish people, these Vikings, right? They said they found people in Iceland. Who could it have been? Come on now. It brings you literally right there, the current from America, guys. This is so long a voyage that the beans would infallibly putrefy. He was wrong, of course. James Wallace, writing of the Orkney Islands in the early 1690s, describes the beans as these pretty nuts, Molucca beans, of which they used to make snuff boxes. He also noted that sometimes are cast in by the sea pieces of trees and sometimes hogsheets of wine and brandy. The American beans have played an important role in Hebridean life for centuries. What? The American beans, yeah. A visitor to the region around 1700 wrote, "There is a variety of nuts called Molucca beans, some of which are used as amulets against witchcraft or an evil eye, particularly the white one, and upon this account they are wore about children's necks, and if any evil is intended to them, they say, the nut changes into a black color." This could possibly indicate that the use of the beans may extend back to at least circa 500 AD, prior to the conversion of the Hebrideans to Christianity. Certainly they were still being valued for their good luck as recently as 1948, especially the white variety called Virgin Mary's beans. A man named Pennant, visiting Islay, Scotland in 1772, wrote about the Molucca beans, which are frequently found on the western shores of this and others of the Hebrides. They are the seeds of the Dolichos wrens, Landnámabók, G. bonduceta, and Mimosa scandens of Linnaeus, natives of Jamaica. All right, beings from Jamaica ending up over there and becoming part of the life of the people of the Hebrides. You guys listening? I was for resolving this phenomenon into shipwrecks, but this solution of mine is absolutely denied. From the frequency and regularity of the appearance of these seeds, American tortoises of turtles have more than once been taken alive on these coasts, tempest driven from their warm seas, and part of the mass of the Tilbury man of war, burnt at Jamaica, was taken up on the western coast of Scotland. All right, come on now. So we're talking about Black Irish, Black Scots, we're talking about the Picts, all these people, possibly coming from ancient America or so-called Atlantis. Doesn't it make more sense, guys? Come on. These facts give probability to the beings arriving by currents and winds. Some of these sea beings have been found fossilized in a bog in South Sweden, thus indicating antiquity. Since ancient times, guys, it's been happening. The arrival of Jamaican beings on the Hebrides, Orkneys, and on the Norway coast serves only as one example of the significant American impact upon the British Irish region. All right? The American impact upon the British Irish region. Again, Great Ireland was here. We've been seeing it in reverse. They taught us history in reverse, and they've been lying to us about that. Gaskell tells us that living passengers from the Americas to Ireland include blue snails, the Portuguese man of war, and living plants. Some of the indigenous wildflowers of the West Ireland coastal fringe have origins in America. Man, this is amazing, guys, and almost certainly have been transplanted with the favor of the Gulf Stream. For example, the American water plant, the slender naiad, is found near Roundstone and Sline Head. American ingredients in the Irish flora include an orchid found only in southwest Ireland and nowhere else in Europe, and another allied orchid found only in the Lough Neagh Basin and in one place in West Scotland. The pipewort spread from Cork to Donegal, found also in West Scotland, and the Canadian blue-eyed grass, and iris actually, widespread in the west of Ireland. There is also a freshwater sponge, widespread in Ireland, and found in the West Scotland, which otherwise belongs only to America. Could human beings have carried some of these species to Ireland? Unintentionally, perhaps, providing them with an environment free of continuous exposure to salt water? Another item of great importance in the North Atlantic drift is timber. Significantly, Lindsay Scott tells us that charcoal, from a site dated in the 1st century BC or AD in the island of Barra and the Hebrides of Scotland, has been identified as spruce. That's an American tree, guys, or wood. It was used as timber in the roof of an Iceland roundhouse farmstead. Import of wood from Norway at that date is very improbable, even if the formidable task could have been faced of towing timber in the North Atlantic astern of ships then available, and it is not much more likely that the wood came from Norse ship wrecked on Barra. Enquiries were therefore made into the probability that the spruce was drift timber from America. What if they were just bringing it? People were bringing it. What if it wasn't just drift? And Dr. J.B. Tart of the Maine Laboratory, Aberdeen, considers that the probability is high, that it came from America. Even earlier than the wrecks on Barra, archaeological work in the Shetlands has revealed post holes of a large building that contain remains of posts up to 10 inches in diameter that have been identified as spruce, along with shards from the Beaker culture. The Beaker folk appeared about 6,000 years ago in Europe. Scott goes on to note that there are still immense quantities of spruce in Newfoundland and Labrador, and that the spruce should be able to survive the Atlantic Passage quite well. There is thus ample reason to suppose this unrequited American export capable of constituting a substantial factor in the economy of those western coastlands of the British Isles that lacked good building timber. Scott continues by asserting that the quantity of drift timber coming ashore is still significant, at least on the coast of Skye and the Outer Hebrides. The arrival of wood in the west of Ireland and at Galway will be noted separately below. Alexander von Humboldt, the German naturalist, took a great interest in the Gulf Stream, of which he wrote in the 1830s. Before the warm current reaches the western Azores, it separates into two branches, one of which turns at certain seasons towards Ireland and Norway, not the other way around, while the other flows in the direction of the Canary Islands. Who's the original people of the Canary Islands? We got videos on this, guys, remember? And the western coast of northern Africa. They say Atlantis is in Mauritania. Seen in reverse, that's just a colony. He noted that the stems of South American and West Indian dicotyledons had been found on the coast of the Canary Islands. Shortly before my arrival at Tenerife, a stem of South American cedar wood, Cedrela obnata, thickly covered with lichens, was cast ashore in the harbor of Santa Cruz. This illustrates the possibility that Americans might have drifted to the Canary Islands, something that could explain similarities sometimes observed between the indigenous Canarios and the Native Americans. Come on now. And guys, we've gone over this research already. If you guys remember in that book, Shadow of Atlantis, I believe, that connection with the Canary Islands and the ancient people of America, right? The Madeira Islands just north of the Canaries also are known to receive fava do mar, or sea beans, from the Americas, as do the Azores farther to the northwest. Von Humboldt took note of the examples of materials reaching the Azores Islands in the 15th century, including bamboos, artificially cut pieces of wood, trunks of an unknown species of pine from Mexico or the West Indies, and corpses of men of a peculiar race having very broad faces. Von Humboldt also reports that Columbus had heard from a settler in the Azores that persons in sailing westward had met with covered barks, which were managed by men of foreign appearance and appeared to be constructed in such a manner that they could not sink. Almadias con casa movediza, que nunca se hunden. The great naturalist here refers to information gathered by Columbus during his pre-1492 studies of the Atlantic. All right, again, Mr. Sarco, Salvador Fernandez Sarco, Sephardic Portuguese Jew, he knew, that's Columbus' real name, he knew of America, he knew he can sail over there. He was never lost, guys. That's a lie they tell us in history. And remember, India wasn't even named India, the one from today. It was called Hindustan and Bharat before that. India didn't get its name till 1947. We just saw that earlier, right? So you explain that to me, why he was calling people Indians, or he thought he was going to India. What India? There was 3 Indias in the Middle Ages. We shall review the latter again when discussing American voyages of the Middle Ages and late Middle Ages. Samuel Eliot Morison noted that in 1939-40, large driftwood rarely comes ashore on the outer Azores, but an old gentleman recalled that after the great storm of 1869, he saw cast up on the beaches of São Miguel a number of tree trunks, bluish, horizontally striped with black. These are easily identified as the Quipo tree, Cavanilesia plantanifolia, which grows in Central America. All right? The wood is superlatively light so that it floats high and catches the wind. Von Humboldt also believed that the Gulf Stream sometimes reached as far as Iceland. All right, again, going in reverse, where its seacoasts, like those of the Faroe Isles, receive a large number of trunks of trees driven thither from America. And this driftwood, which formerly came in greater abundance, was used for the purposes of building and cut into boards and laths. The fruit of tropical plants collected on the Icelandic shores, especially between Raufarhaven and Vatnafjord, show that the movement of the water is from a southerly direction. The significance of American timbers drifting southward in the Labrador Current or northward in the Gulf Stream, and then being picked up by the North Atlantic Current, may not have been lost upon American fishing folk and navigators from Greenland, Newfoundland, and Nova Scotia, right, coast southwards. Other evidence of the rapid movement of objects from the Caribbean to Scotland is provided by the example of the main mast of the English ship of war, the Tilbury, which was destroyed by fire in the 7 Years' War on the coast of St. Domingo. Listen to this. It was carried by the Gulf Stream to the northern coast of Scotland. You see, this ship, which was on a fire, destroyed, its debris, what was left of it, was carried by the Gulf Stream to the northern coast of Scotland and cast filled with palm oil. The remains of the cargo of an English ship wrecked off Cape Lopez in Africa, again, into Africa, not out of, which were in like manner carried to Scotland after having twice traversed the Atlantic, once from east to west between 2 degrees and 12 degrees north latitude, following the course of the equinoctial current, and once from west to east between 45 degrees and 55 degrees north latitude by help of the Gulf Stream. Reference was also made to a bottle with a written paper in it that was thrown from a ship in 38 degrees 52 north latitude and 63 to 58 degrees west longitude on January 20th, 1819, and that arrived on June 2nd, 1820, on the Rosses near the island of Aran at the entrance to Galway Bay. All right, what did we learn about the Isle of Iran? That its people were so-called black or brown complexion. And this is from old anthropological books we read of these people. I'm not making it up. Catch up on the research. Historically, scholarly books writing about the local inhabitants of the Isles of Iran and Scotland. Now you can see things can come in there from America. Many other bottles have also set out by the Newfoundland Fisheries Department near the Grand Banks and northward to Labrador, designed to float just beneath the sea surface so as to not be directly affected by winds. 20 bottles were retrieved at points stretching from the Azores to Norway, with concentrations of 6 on the Irish coast and 6 on the west coast of Scotland, including the Orkneys and Shetlands. The period varied from 11 to 17 months. Bottles set out in the region of latitude 60 degrees north, longitude 20 degrees west, some 200 miles south of Iceland, have usually reached the coast of the Outer Hebrides or on those of the Orkneys, Shetlands, or Norway. During the last century and a half, such items as Caribbean shells, coconuts, bamboos, confirmed turtle, and pumice have continued to reach the west coast of Scotland. Pumice of possible Caribbean origin is also common in West Scottish archaeology sites. All right? Some of non-Mediterranean type being found in a chamber tomb on the island of Skye, for example. Jean Marion, aka Freemanville, a French authority on the sea, tells us that valuable hardwood from the rivers of Mexico was also carried by the stream to be washed ashore on the coast of Ireland and Wales. This was an extremely important source of rare tropical woods for the people of that region. Marion, a student of navigational history, also states that the first success of crossing the Atlantic could only have come from the American side. Again, we're going to repeat that. This expert in navigational history, he stated that the first success of crossing the Atlantic, it didn't come from Africa. It could only have come from the American side, all right? Body bag for the illusion. The true old world, right? We read earlier, the true old world, the oldest land out of the primordial waters, right? Dodge your own hijacks, empty your cup. Because the crossing is much less difficult in that direction. A French writer has said justly in all probability that if America had been the old world, if it had been, it is the old world. We just read that earlier. Its inhabitants would have discovered Europe long before we did. All right, if it's the old world, we know it is. So what is that telling us? Because we know this is the old world, that means that its inhabitants did discover Europe long before we did, in fact, discover America. The other way around. This is what I've been trying to tell you. This is very important to understand when we're going to read about Greater Ireland and what they found here in New England. When we're seeing all these people talking about, they were here before Columbus, Scandinavians, all these other people, the Vikings. You're seeing in reverse. That was way after. We had gone over there already before that. All right. And again, I'm going to read that. And America was the old world, and it is. America being the old world, that means that the inhabitants of America discovered Europe long before we did, long before Europeans, in fact, discovered America. Of course, this may indeed be what happened. This is what happened. That Americans reached Europe long before any Europeans reached America. All right? Americans reached Europe long before any Europeans reached America. All right? Continue on the next page. It says Marion tells us also, I remember he's a navigational historian expert. He tells us also that one can sail in a straight line from Boston via Newfoundland to Ireland and Cornwall with almost the certainty of fair winds. The other direction requires twice the distance, thrice the time, and 4 times the sweat. Is much harder the other way around, guys. Pay attention. We've gone over this before, but we're doing it today in more detail. All right? Even when we've gone over this before, people didn't listen. People still trying to debate. This is true right here. Go test it out yourself if you don't believe it. It's a much harder the other way. It's easier from America to Europe. It's easier. In the 1860s, a 48-foot slope, Alice, was sailed from North America to the Isle of Wight in less than 20 days with very favorable winds, and in recent times a wooden raft was propelled from Canada to Northern Europe by means of the North Atlantic current. Stephen C. Jett cites the 68-day passage of one William Verity from Florida to Ireland and a 12-foot slope, as well as the crossing by 2 men from New York to the Scilly Islands in 55 days, and a 17-foot dory powered only by oars. More recently, a French boatman, Gerald Abouteville, completed a 3,000-mile journey across the Atlantic from Massachusetts to Brittany in 71 days solely by rowing. In 1991, he also rowed across the Pacific in a 26-foot kayak. Early evidence of successful voyages across the North Atlantic includes the crossing by a Norseman, Thorhall, with 8 companions from Newfoundland and a Batu, going directly from America to Ireland. From America to Ireland. Again, where's the pigs from? Where did these ancient Israelites that ended up, these Hebrews, so-called Hebrews, in the British Isles in Ireland or Caledonia, Scotia, where were they really coming from? It was much easier to go from America to Ireland, according to Marion, the historical navigation expert. This is probably the same voyage as that carried out by a small group of Norsemen about the year 1010 in a small boat treated with a seal blubber after their main ship became rotten. Only half of them were able to get into the small boat, and in that they traveled by sail or oars, is not clear, from the Greenland Sea to Dublin, Ireland, okay? All right, so I actually skipped ahead a little bit in this book. I'm going to read the last paragraph of this chapter. It starts giving so many more examples. You guys can get the full chapter if you like. I mean, it just keeps going, proving that it's a lot easier to go from Americas to that side of the world. Continuing, just to end this chapter, says, it is intriguing to think that the Americans of 1477 and other people from America may have had a genetic impact upon the Irish. Listen, come on, man. This gives me chills just talking about it, because it just like proves all the research all these years and what I've been theorizing and saying. Where did these pigs come from? Where did these ancient people of Ireland come from? A lot of people are very biased when it comes to this, Phoenician history or research, and they want to make them just Europeans and white and Aryan and all this other stuff. They're just very biased with it. They're not really understanding where the true old world is. All right, again, it is intriguing to think that Americans and other people from America may have a genetic impact upon the Irish. A genetic impact upon the Irish. Such an idea, incidentally, does not surprise some modern Galwegians, some of whom have told me that The local people, and especially those of the Aran Islands, show some hint of Native American features, right? And again, that goes with what we learned about the Aran Islands. Come on now, of their people, what they look like. These were described as melanated people, dark complexion people. And they show some hints of Native American features. Come on now. Equally intriguing is the fact that the seal of otter stories and beliefs of these coastal peoples remind one very much of Native American stories. Strikingly similar are Irish seal and sea otter stories of Miluk, Oregon stories of marriages of humans with sea otters and swordfish, for example. Perhaps there are ancient American influence among the peoples of Ireland and Scotland, influences to join with the potato as a key marker of Irish and British life, right? Why did he just say that? Because we think that potato originated in Ireland was a staple of Ireland, but potatoes are coming from South America, guys. Originate in South America, all right? So once again, this was the book, The American Discovery of Europe. We just read literally, we just missed like 2 or 3 pages of chapter 2 of this book, The American Discovery of Europe, just so you guys can get an idea of what I'm going to be saying as we keep learning and reading about Great Ireland, or just the idea that people came from America into Europe. If you know this research about the currents and all this history, all the stuff that has washed ashore, beans, food, timber, people, then you would know it's a lot easier than the logically, like he said earlier, if anybody was to cross the Atlantic, this is the navigation expert, right, in history, it would have been Americans that did it and discovered Europe, not the other way around. Because that's what we're going to be reading in these other books about these sagas of the Icelandic people and Scandinavians. They're seeing it in reverse. Those are just people going back. They knew of this land. So again, we're just going to go back real quick. Now that we have all this background, right? All this context. I did that on purpose, guys. I know I read this earlier, but now we have a little bit of context and background to why I say what I say. Now, the book is again The Pre-Columbian Discovery of America by Northmen, illustrated by translations from the Icelandic sagas, edited by notes in the general introduction by B.F. de Costa. This is from 1868. Again, we just learned we've been seeing it in reverse this whole time. How did these people know America was over there? Maybe their ancient ancestors were coming from there. Maybe, right? Let's go to where we left off earlier. So they were talking about how they were reaching Iceland and all these sagas, proving that. It says here the settlement of Greenland. Now again, I'm showing here in this map from earlier that I showed you, appears to be that at some point, at least in 1587, in this Monte Urbano map of 1587, which is a flat earth map, showing an ice-free wall, or South Pole, ice-free. You guys see that? Lands and animals and rivers and mountains. Now, when we zoom in to this area we're talking about, right, you see Ireland, the British Isles. You go up, you see Friesland, which to me, I think is Iceland. And then they're calling Greenland Iceland. Now, did they change that because Greenland is a lot closer to America and they wanted you to think they didn't go that far? Maybe, but now they're talking about the settlement of Iceland, Greenland, right? Look how close Greenland is to the Americas. So we're heading over to Google Earth, right? Where they're showing us the balls spinning in space. That's the hijack, right? But just for reference, I want to show you guys what I'm talking about. You see Greenland, right? Greenland, look how close it is to the Americas, literally part of almost Canada, literally close to the oldest land on the earth, the Laurentian mountain chain. Remember what Louis Agassiz told us earlier, America, the true old world. Before Europe was even, land, it was just little islands here and there. America was already out. Now look at what I'm trying to say. You see where Iceland is, right? It's on this side, and Greenland is on this side. Now look at the old map again from 1587, right? Matching the geography, Iceland over here and Greenland over here, but it's called Iceland. Iceland. So they changed the names because Iceland was a lot closer. They don't want us to think people went to Greenland or Newfoundland from Europe or that the vice versa. Do you see how close it is? Again, let's go back. Do you see how close Greenland is? So if so-called Norwegian, Swedish, Finland people, Finnish, Irish, British, all these people, if they went to Iceland and Greenland, why wouldn't they go to the Americas? But now, what do we know now, guys? That the currents literally bring you from America to this side of the world. Opposite. It's much easier. If anybody traveled across the Atlantic, first it would have been Americans. It would have been Americans. Don't forget that. We're seeing it in reverse again when we're reading these books right here. Either way, let's read what it says. The settlement of Greenland. But as time passed on, the people of Iceland felt a new impulse for colonization in strange lands, and the tide of immigration began to tend towards Greenland in the west. This was chiefly inaugurated by a man named Eric the Red. Eric the Red, born in Norway in the year 935. Now remember, the currents will bring you to Norway from the Americas. Ancient people possibly going into Norway before Eric the Red was born. Now, can you answer me this? Why is he called the Red? Why is Eric called the Red? What do they call the American Indians, guys? Don't they call the American Indians the Red Man? The Red Man? Why is he being distinguished as the Red? Could he have American ancestry? And that's why he knew to sail that way? That's why he was one of the first to go that way? Think about that. Think about that. On account of manslaughter, he was obliged to flee from Jardar and take up his abode in Iceland. The date of removal to Iceland is not given, though it is said that at the time the island was very generally inhabited. Again, it was already inhabited. It was already inhabited. By whom? Who was in Iceland when he got there? We just read, right? The currents can bring people over there easily. Not just through them sailing on their own, but even through shipwrecks or just getting caught in the currents. Getting caught, they would end up in Iceland. So who you think was in Iceland? In Greenland too. Here, however, he could not live in peace, and early in the year 982, he was again outlawed for manslaughter by the public Thing and condemned to banishment. He accordingly fitted out a ship and announced his determination to go in search of the land lying in the ocean at the west, which it was said Gunnibjorn, Ulf Krigisson, saw when in the year 876 he was driven out to sea by a storm. Eric sailed westward and found land, where he remained and explored the country for 3 years. At the end of this period, he returned to Iceland, given a newly discovered land the name of Greenland, in order, as he said, to attract settlers who would be favorably impressed by so pleasing a name. The summer after his return to Iceland, he sailed once more for Greenland, taking with him a fleet of 35 ships, only 14 of which reached their destination, the rest being either driven back or lost. This event took place, as the saga says, 15 winters before the introduction of Christianity into Iceland, which we know was accomplished in the year AD 1000. The date of Eric's second voyage must therefore be set down at 985. But before proceeding to the next step in Icelandic adventure, it will be necessary to give a brief sketch of the progress of the Greenland colony, together with a relation of the circumstances which led to its final extinction. So the progress of the Greenland colonies. We're just going to read a little bit. I just want to, so you guys can have a background. There is but little continuity in the history of the Icelandic occupation of Greenland. We have already seen that the second voyage of Eric the Red Man, took place in the year 985. Colonists appear to have followed him in considerable numbers, and the best portions of the land were soon appropriated by the principal men, who gave the chief bays and capes names that indicated the occupants following the example of Eric, who dwelt in Brat Talit in Eriksfjord. Look at that name, Brat, Brit, Brat, the Brats, the Hindu Brat, Brahmins, it's all connected. In the year 999, Leif, son of Eric, so Leif Erikson, right? Also another famous so-called explorer that discovered so-called America before Columbus. Again, that's Eric the Red son. So does he have American ancestry? Is he also so-called red? Copper colored? Is he also copper colored? He sailed out to Norway and passed the winter of the court of King Olaf Tryggvason, where he accepted the Christian faith, which was then being zealously propagated by the king. He was accordingly baptized, and when the spring returned, the king requested him to undertake the introduction of Christianity in Greenland, urging the consideration that no man was better qualified for the task. Accordingly, he set sail from Norway with a priest and several members of the religious order, arriving at Brattahlid in Greenland without any accident. His pagan father, pagan, huh? Eric the Red was pagan. Don't they call the Indians pagan? Was incensed by the bringing in on the Christian priests, which act he regarded as pregnant with evil. Yet after some persuasion on the part of Leif, he renounced heathenism and nominally accepted Christianity. Being baptized by the priest, his wife Thorhild, made less opposition and appears to have received the new faith with much willingness. One of her first acts was to build a church, which was known far and wide as Thorhild's Church. These examples appear to have been very generally followed, and Christianity was adopted in both Iceland and Greenland at about the same period, though its acceptance did not immediately produce any very radical change in the spiritual life of the people. In course of time, a number of churches were built, the ruins of which remain down to our day. All right. So that's just a little brief history, right? Who was there first? Who was discovering supposedly these places, right? Again, I believe, as we just read, these people are just going back. They knew these places were there. They probably had ancient knowledge. People were washing up in Norway and Iceland and Ireland and the British Isles and Scandinavia, way before this. Again, it was Americans that discovered those areas before Europeans discovered America. All right. So a little further down in the book, it says here the discovery of America. Now remember, you can't discover a place, just like Columbus, you can't discover a place that already has people. All right? Get that in your mind. So we find that the Northmen were well acquainted with other parts of the world, and that they possessed all the means of reaching the continent in the West. We come therefore to the question, did the Northmen actually discover and explore the coast of the country now known as America? Did they? I'm sure they went over to the Americas back, or that they already knew that was there, but they weren't the first. That doesn't mean they discovered the place. They might have had previous knowledge to this place already. No one can say that the idea wears any appearance of improbability, for there is certainly nothing wonderful in the exploit. And after conceding the fact that the colonies of the Northmen existed in Greenland for at least 300 years, we must prepare ourselves for something of this kind. Again, let's go back. Why wouldn't people, right, in either direction, right, that are in Greenland, not discover Iceland, or even go to Sweden, right, Norway, the United Kingdoms, or the other way around, coming from Europe, Sweden, Norway, right, going into Iceland, Greenland, and not going to America? Look how close it is, guys. Have some logic. You gotta be logical when it comes to this stuff. You gotta really be logical. Look how close. It's literally part of the Americas. It's literally part of the Americas. Greenland is literally part of the Americas. And they were there for 300 years. And these are facts. Like, I'm not arguing all that stuff. Yeah, they can get that, credit and fame. But who's Eric the Red? Why is he called the Red Man? And again, ancient Americans have already been going that way. Before Eric the Red. Before. All right, get that in your head too. So if people are in Greenland, why wouldn't they go to the Americas, guys? It's right next to it. Come on now, let's use some common sense and logic. Indeed, it is well nigh, if not altogether unreasonable, to suppose that a seafaring people like the Northmen or like American Indians, could live for 3 centuries within a short voyage of this vast continent, Greenland, and then never go to Europe, right? They got to see it the other way around. They're saying, how could Northmen who are seafarers not make it to America? It's unlogical. It's unreasonable to think, to suppose. Well, it's the same the other way around. If Americans who have the currents to their favor, the winds to their favor, and have navigational ships, why wouldn't they end up discovering Europe, which came much later out of the waters? America was already out. Remember, use your logic. So he says, how could these Northmen who are seafarers not know of the existence of America, right? Being in Greenland, which is right next to it. A supposition like this implies a rare credulity, and whoever is capable of believing it must be capable of believing almost anything. But on this point, we're not left to conjecture. The whole decision, in the absence of monuments like those of Greenland, turns upon a question of fact. The point is this: do the manuscripts which describe these voyages belong to the pre-Columbian age? If so, then the Northmen are entitled to the credit of the prior discovery of America. Again, no, they're not. There's already people in America. You can't discover a place where there's already people. And these people that you supposedly have discovered already had gone to your country, already had gone to Europe, and brought you things, and brought you knowledge, food, turkeys, corn. That these manuscripts belong to the pre-Columbian age is of capable of demonstration as the fact that the writings of Homer existed prior to the age of Christ. Before the intelligent persons deny either of these points, they must first succeed in blotting out numberless pages of well-known history. The manuscripts in which we have versions of all the sagas relating to America is found in the celebrated Codex Flatoiensis, a work that was finished in the year 1387 or 1395 at the latest. All right. And what did we learn earlier around that year, 1387? That's when they first mention and draw the Antilles Island, which is the eastern part of North America. Come on now. Look how it's matching. This collection, made with great care and executed in the highest style of art, is now preserved in its integrity in the archives of Copenhagen. These manuscripts were for a time supposed to be lost, but were ultimately found safely lodged in the repository in the monastery library of the island of Flato, from whence they were transferred to Copenhagen, with a large quantity of other literary material collected from various localities. In these sagas, which refer to America, were interpolations. It would have early become apparent, as abundant means exist for detecting frauds, yet those who have examined the whole question do not find any evidence that invalidates their historical statements. In the absence, therefore, of respectable testimony to the contrary, we accept it as a fact that the sagas relating to America are the productions of the men who gave them in their present form nearly, if not quite an entire century before the age of Columbus. All right. And I agree. People were going back and forth way before Columbus, so-called Columbus, right? Salvador Fernandez Sarco, the Sephardic Portuguese Jew. They just admitted he was a Sephardic Jew in mainstream news. We already had proven that. Okay. So real quick, we're going to go into a little bit of some of the clips of, the research of Gunnar Thompson. If you guys forgot, if you haven't watched this video where I showed the whole presentation he did regarding the Egyptian maize, proving that so-called Egyptians had corn or maize. We're not talking about wheat or barley, literally corn. And also he's going to mention where Moses was. He's going to show you there's an old map showing you how they went from America into Europe, bringing corn and even the turkeys over there. So just to correlate with what we're just showing today, a reverse travel, an original migration from Americas to Europe.
Welcome to the program on Egyptian maize. I'm Gunnar Thompson. I will be your host and your guide as we follow a track of clues all across the world, trying to solve the mystery of Egyptian maize. That was an individual by the name of Moses. Well, the Bible says that Moses wandered about in the Sinai desert for 40 years. The big problem was that the tribes of Israel were also following around behind Moses, and that means everybody was lost for about 40 years. Well, the Sinai Desert just is not all that big. If you've got a good supply of water and a decent camel, you should be able to cross it in about a month. But they wandered around for 40 years, and they were following what they believed was what they should be doing. It was written down in stone, the laws, and Moses was looking for the promised land. Well, perhaps he was looking in the wrong place. Perhaps the promised land was, as many historians in the 18th century finally realized, the promised land was North and South America. Perhaps the promised land was, as many historians in the 18th century finally realized, the promised land was North and South America. This here is the Alberton de Verga map. It's a map that I found back in 1995. I brought it out of hiding and I introduced it to the scientific community. Now, the important thing about this map, it was made by Alberton de Verga, who was a Venetian, in 1414. And it's a secret commercial map, but it shows up here, this is north of the British Isles. Here's the British Isles, Spain, Norway, Africa, Mediterranean, Italy. North of the British Isles, we have this orange or red continent, and it sticks out from Norway. Well, there were many names for this ancient continent. The Norwegians called it Norveka, or Dusky Norway. The Irish called it Hibernia Major, or Great Ireland, and the Scots called it Estopaland, or New Scotland. This is interesting to me right north and west of the British Isles, because in Europe during the 13th, 14th, 15th centuries, the merchants from across the seas, from this land area that appears on this map, they were bringing maize and turkeys across the ocean, across the Atlantic Ocean. And these were being introduced into Northern Europe. Well, there's a number of names that the Northern Europeans had for maize. One was turkey corn, and that's because the corn was fed to turkeys. Another name was Welsh corn, and that's because merchants from Wales were bringing the corn across the Atlantic. And another term was Indian corn, and that's because many people thought that it was India that was located across the sea. So we find similar names for turkeys and corn: Indian corn, Welsh corn, turkey corn, turkeys, Welsh hens, and dindons, or Indian hens, and names for turkeys. And this is because the merchants were carrying these animals across the sea. Now, this is really intriguing to me because the mystery of Egyptian maize got its start in Scotland when a number of my colleagues, time detectives, noticed that there were carvings of the maize plant, or Indian corn, inside Rosslyn Chapel. And Rosslyn Chapel is located right in the vicinity of Edinburgh, Scotland. Here is a woven image of a turkey farm in Sweden during the 10th century. This is from a tapestry in the Stockholm Museum. These are turkeys. They're New World birds. Here we have two turkeys on the Bayeux tapestry from France, and the tapestry was made in around the year 1070, or slightly after the Norman invasion of England. Once again, we have turkeys indicated, and the French often referred to the turkeys as dindons, or birds of India. Here is a German turkey on a mural from the Schleswig Cathedral, circa 1280. One name for turkeys in Germany was the Welsh hen. So we have both names, Welsh corn and Welsh hen, arriving in Germany. This suggests that merchants from a Welsh colony in the New World were importing turkeys and turkey feed at the same time. It was a way for merchants to make money.
All right, so you heard it from Gunnar Thompson, correlating what we just heard about people going from the Americas over to Europe. Makes sense with the currents and all the history we've just gone over. We know America's a true world, that is the oldest land. We're going to get into this book. This is the main book I wanted to actually get into, but I wanted to provide some context before we got into this book, right? It's called The Ruins of Great Ireland in New England. The Ruins of Great Ireland in New England. If you don't know, there's a lot of legends and myths of a place called Great Ireland, or Greater Ireland, towards the west in the Atlantic. All right? This was a real place, guys. Again, just like India Superior or Asia Major is in the Americas, Great Ireland was in ancient America. Okay? And here's an image, right, of explorations this author is doing. It says view from White Cavern into the plaza showing Sola. Okay? Again, this book is The Ruins of Great Ireland in New England, with photographs, illustrations, maps, and drawings by William B. Goodwin, engineering and photography by Malcolm D. Pearson, black and white drawings by Professor Vincent T. Fagan of Notre Dame University, Indiana. All right. This is from 1946. I'm just going to read the introduction here real quick for the dismount. Okay. And it says here in the introduction, it is no easy matter to properly explain our interpretation of what these ruined sites must mean, particularly from a historical point of view. In the first place, no one has ever given these relics of a long distant past any really serious consideration or study. No one qualified to do so has honestly tried to pass on their origin because no one man ever contacted more than one site until Messrs. Cheney and Pearson first opened up the subject less than 18 years ago, with the examples of Upton and North Salem as a beginning. There is nothing like this sort of stone construction anywhere outside of New England and all the United States, nor any housing of such of a primitive nature. Now, I think they have found similar structures like this in other parts of America, right? And maybe he just hasn't, in his time, hasn't been able to find that or know about that, right? We have tried to explain that these sites are not the work of Scandinavian people. All right? That is, that they were not erected by the early Greenland Northmen, okay? It wasn't them. We just read, right? All the history in the background. Yeah, we know people of, from Scandinavia came into the Americas, but they were coming back. They were just going back and forth. Again, ancient Americans were going over there. These ruins, he's telling you, they weren't built by these Northmen. It shouldn't be credited to them. They haven't typed nothing to do with the Nordic race in any shape or form. So they can't say, oh, we discovered this and then they came here and built these things and then they left all of a sudden. That's wrong history. They represent a Celtic style of crude architecture found in Europe and parts of the British Isles and are the works of discoverers and first settlers in Iceland, Greenland, and Labrador. So they do resemble places over there, but who really built them? They were actually coming from the Americas. Sometime before the Scandinavian race began to settle definitely in the same last three named countries, they were already there before they even got there. The so-called Eric the Red, Leif Erikson, all those ruins were already there, similar ruins that they're finding here in New England. In support of our contention that these Celts, finally fleeing before the Northmen as the latter spread out, were Irish, we give all the known historical references. All right, so again, even though he's given major drop here, and he's saying, well, it wasn't Scandinavians that built it, it was actually Irish or Celts. Again, seeing it in reverse, guys. They're always going to start, they're always going to see it in reverse. They always want to act like America was uninhabited, like people couldn't build these ruins, like they haven't found old classic Ogham here and runic inscriptions here, way older than the ones they're finding in Europe. America's the true old world. Remember what we read right in the beginning. This is the oldest land. Geological evidence proves that. America's the oldest land coming out of the waters. So why wouldn't it have the oldest people? Let's be logical. But either way, let's read what he's going to say, right? Beyond that, we cannot go and will not even surmise. If we are correct in our opinion that these stone ruins compose all that is left of what has been termed Great Ireland, alias White Man's Land, we humbly think our labor is not lost, but on the contrary, has materially added to the early history of America. The reader will have to judge for himself after we present our case, for his judgment is so difficult a problem. In my book, The Truth About Leif Erikson and the Greenland Voyages to New England, in which I followed out the theory that Portsmouth Harbor, New Hampshire, was indeed the stream fjord of the saga of Eric the Red, the first. So he's saying Portsmouth was actually called Streamy Ford in the saga of Eric the Red. And guys, I wouldn't doubt that. Most likely it was. I had in my mind that the references to Great Ireland contained therein would, if Great Ireland could be properly meted and bounded, go a long way to substantiate my conclusions as to Leif's houses being on the Piscataway River, where it bends to meet the tidal waters of the Great and Little Bays. Hence, this book is, as it were, a follow-up of that earliest research work, and for my own part, the two will go a considerable way towards proving my theory that the bounds of the Nordic exploration of our New England called Vinland, that is Vinland, Vinland is New England, coincided with those of Great Ireland. All right, so if you're interested in reading his first book, go ahead and find it and read it. All right, that is from the Penobscot River in Maine to the vicinity of Cape Cod Bay. That is, Vinland follows the coastline of Maine, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts, while Great Ireland parallels that coastline with the strict proviso that there is a stretch of no man's land existing between them for the self-same distance, namely from the Penobscot River to Cape Cod Bay. We illustrate our meaning by a modern map of the territory involved, duly shaded to show Vinland, its capital, at Leif's houses, the stretch of no man's land finally back at that Great Ireland. It must be understood that there is no mention nor reference whatever to any of these strange stone sites in our early colonial history of New England, nor on any of the earliest maps extant anywhere, including that of John Smith of Virginia, 1614, and one by William Wood, an Englishman arriving in Boston in 1629. You will not find outside of the elusive name of the towered city of Norumbega any conclusive reference to such widespread stone sites on a map of North America. And again, that's a whole other mythical land, Norumbega, and that was here too. Most likely Newfoundland, Nova Scotia. That was here, guys. This is a matter of the highest importance. All references, historically, speaking to Great Ireland, alias White Man's Land, are found in the Greenland and Iceland sagas, or in the history of Iceland in the 13th century. While John Smith did not himself penetrate very far into the interior, William Wood, on the other hand, followed the land as far as Cape Ann and the Merrimack, which was in touch with or close to several of our sites, and he makes no mention of the fact either on his famous map or in his description of the Indians and the first settled towns in Massachusetts and New Hampshire. To date, we have located more than 70 individual unmortared stone buildings or examples of stonework connected directly with such housing. They are all situated on a very rear to the three great trunk line Indian paths known today as number 1, 2, and 28 in our state system of highways. All right, is that Route 1? They consist of several types of housing. True conical beehives, as at Uptown and Hopkinton on the Connecticut path, with one flat slab beehive at Webster on the same path. Number 2, great trail called the Mohawk Trail ran from Albany, New York to Boston Bay. Number 1 is the trail from New York State to Boston Bay via New London and Providence and on the Newburyport, Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and Portland, Maine, up to the headwaters of the Penobscot River. No building has been found nearer to the sea coast than 18 miles as the crow flies. In addition to the beehives, 19 in all, there are 7 small stone huts and at least 5 walled rooms with one heavy covered stone slab weighing from 18 to 22 tons. The largest stones yet found as a part of any building are the 2 great anchor stones to the so-called White Cavern at the North Salem village site. The one weighing 75 tons, the other 50 tons. As they were too heavy to move, the building was erected over them as cornerstones. Number 28 is the modern highway from Boston to Derry, New Hampshire, and on the Concord, New Hampshire, where a trail of parallel number 2 leads to the Connecticut River between Bellows Falls Vermont, and Charlestown, Vermont. Near here is the imposing site at Ackworth, New Hampshire, where there are 3 beehives, the most westerly of all sites so far located except the beehive at South Royalton, Vermont, discovered later. If we are correct in our assumption that these far-flung examples over 300 miles apart are indeed the remains of the settlement of Irish Chaldean monks of a country known to the Northmen as Great Ireland, then we have a monastic center at North Salem, New Hampshire, and at West Andover, Mass, on both sides of the Merrimack River, from which missionaries following the above-mentioned ancient Indian trails went out to bring Christianity to the Algonquin Indians in the 10th century. All right, so again, we're going to dodge the hijack. We know that they were going in reverse first. If anybody crossed the Atlantic, remember, let's not forget what we just learned. If anybody crossed the Atlantic, it had to be American Indians. They brought that type of building over there. All right, to the so-called Irish. And why would you call this Great Ireland? So where's Minor Ireland or Lesser Ireland, right? Why are you calling this Great Ireland? This is the original place, the home, the origin of a lot of those people that ended up becoming so-called ancient Irish. Thus, stone beehive cells were erected by the individual monk miles from the parent sites among the various tribes, but in order to keep in touch with his spiritual father or abbot, he kept to the man-traveled highways on which the Indians themselves traveled from their villages to the sea. So they're even using the Indian trails, right? But that they weren't Indians, right? They weren't Indians. They had to have been from Ireland because nobody was here. Oh, Indians couldn't have built that. No. This is the kind of thinking these authors do. It's a very kind of little biased, even though this is a great drop here. The reason they chose the large flat outcrops of native granite in so many instances for a site on which to erect these crude stone houses is suggested by Professor Vincent T. Fagan of Notre Dame University under the phrase ubi Petrus ibi ecclesia, or where the rock, St. Peter, is there is the church. This religious cult represents the very earliest primitive Christian form of religion, not only in Ireland, but in all Christendom, and it is amazing how well preserved, comparatively speaking, some of the larger buildings remain. All right, so what is that telling you? Origin of Christianism, Christendom in ancient America. Why did they write the first Bible in Algonquin language, in the Americas? What's up with these praying Indians? Why did these people wear fringes, The Great Beehive at Uptown is a case in point, as it does between two forks of the Connecticut Path, proving the antiquity of the Great Indian Highway, worn smooth over countless years by the red man's moccasined foot. The red man, just like Eric the Red. Iceland, that little island in the northern seas of Europe, first seen and described at Ultima Thule by the Marsilian Greek explorer Pitas about 350 BC. So they were calling Greenland or Iceland Thule, right, in ancient writings. If you guys didn't know that. Has a long and highly honorable history. Here today sits the oldest parliamentary body in the whole world. That almost mythical Saint Brendan of Clonfert seems to have sighted Iceland on the epical 7th voyage in 55 AD. Dr. Hijack with the chronologies might have been the Middle Ages, when he later reached the Azores, Joyous Isles, or the Blessed, which far to the southward lie. If Dr. Stevenson suggests Pythias saw John Mayon Island and not Iceland, it matters little. Dicuil, the Irish monk, in his History of the World, states that about 35 years before he wrote his history, in 830 AD, a little community of Christians, Irish Chaldee, check out my Chaldea and Ireland videos or series. All right, major drop correlates with this, right? Because where did Abraham was in Chaldea, right, in the Bible, but where did his people come from originally? Right, Canaan, or the Holy Land, the true Holy Land, the Americas, before he went back. And it makes sense, right? Knowing what we know today, right? that they were traveling back and forth. It's a lot closer than going to so-called Egypt of today. Ireland and North America, this area, is a lot closer. People were going back and forth. Here they lived, so had already settled on the island in the year 795 AD. Here they lived for some 75 years unmolested until the island became gradually settled for once and all time by the pagan Northmen from the northern isles of Britain. Before this heathen surge of settlers, the monks gave way because of the Chronicle quaintly puts, because the Chronicle plainly puts it, they did not wish to dwell with a pagan people. Precipitous was their departure, that they left behind them their missiles. So sorry, I had to move the screen a little bit. Their crosses and their crooks. So he's crediting people coming from other places leaving these marks here. By these works, the Norse history states they were known. These Chaldees, lived in 3 distinct communities, Papay, Papili, and Kirby. No heathen temple was ever erected on any of these sites by the Northmen. And when one settler dared to set up his homestead at Kirby, he paid for his temerity by an unnatural death. These Irish first-comers sailed away to either Sculpin Island or Greenland, to reappear perhaps in Great Ireland in America 130 years later, so the Norse sagas infer. It is quite probable that their first stop was Iceland. All right, again, seeing it in reverse. Now look what he's going to say here, talking about white man's land, right? The little old dark people, again, the little old dark people, dark melanated, so-called black, of Iceland, conquered but not exterminated by the Milesians about 350 BC. Who's the Milesians? That's all related to Israelites and Hebrews. We got the drop already in previous videos. Must have lived their lives the hard way, being inured to every sort of exposure due to a primitive form of existence. They seem to have formed the highest of the 4 lower orders in the early body politic after the conquest. That is, they came directly after the local officials of the ruling Goidal Celts. Some were indeed free men, others were and a servile class expected to serve their masters. It would appear that this class, the Salies, was composed of the largest number of the population as a whole in the entire country. One might term them the common people, who did the hard work of a pastoral life in each community under the bailiffs, the chiefs, the nobles, and the petty kings of the 5 great divisions of the land itself. As long as paganism existed, down to 266 AD, the upper classes held them in the hollow of their hands. That is, they were never owners of the land, but paying for the privileges by rent in kind, strictly feudal system with all that such a system implies. From their ranks were chosen the guards and servitors of the petty kings with certain privileges and rights of attendance at meeting pro bono publico as far as the ruling class was concerned. From this rank in Ireland came, we think, after 266 AD, the religious sect to be known as the Salies or Chaldees, the Chaldeans, Druids. So real quick, just to show like what he's talking about, some sites here in New England, one in New Hampshire, which I was privileged to go visit when I was still living in Boston. America's Stonehenge, they call it. So let's just look at some images real quick of this place. So this is what you kind of find in New Hampshire right here. As you probably heard of Stonehenge, the mysterious collection of megaliths, big rocks over in Old England. But did you know that America has its own Stonehenge in New England? If you want to see prehistoric archaeology or enigma, all you need to do is head about 40 miles north of Boston to Salem, New Hampshire, where you can explore 30 acres of cave-like dwellings, astronomical aligned rock formations, and sacrificial stone, and other mysterious structures left behind by an unknown people. So again, because this resembles things in Europe, they're never going to credit ancient Americans. They always try to say, well, we don't know. No, the Indians didn't do it. So who you think is? They did. This is the true old world. Just another look here on another website, New England, from the editors at Yankee. Here's an image of America's Stonehenge, nestled in the woods of Salem, New Hampshire. Okay. So, located near the summit of Mystery Hill is a massive complex of stone chambers. So, I actually visited this place. It was pretty amazing when I went there with my friend. And in the middle of this place, there's a big solar eclipse alignment. And I'm going to show you guys. I think they got a picture of it. I believe this goes even more down. Like, I believe this is like buried, most of it. This is like the top of the structures. I think, because a lot of it, you go into these little holes, even though there's ground in there and it's very low, it's dirt. So I don't know how low it goes. I think that goes into caves or something. So this is kind of what you see here. All right. America's Stonehenge. So this is kind of what the guy is talking about. He found many ruins like this. He's saying there's Great Ireland. So this is inside one of them. And that's what I was saying. I think these go a little deeper, further down. I would say some of them are more buried. All right. And again, America's Stonehenge. This is in New Hampshire. Again, about 40 miles north of Boston, the city of Boston. And I guess they got artifacts there. I don't remember going into the museum. I don't know if it was open when I went. But look, they won't let people go in this one. So there's a lot of this throughout New England. And not just New England, guys, all over North America. Now, the author's saying he hasn't found it anywhere else. He hasn't really looked. We've shown similar places like this in other parts of North America, even South America. All right? It's not just here. But this is what he's saying, Great Ireland. And again, they try to give credit to people coming from other parts of the world to build it. But again, this is the true old world. And we know people were going to that side of Europe since ancient times, before Europeans crossed over here. So who's to say they're not seeing it in reverse? They probably are seeing it in reverse. Here's a model of the contour model of the America's Stonehenge, it says. You guys can see. Some more images. Okay. Some animal bones found at the site. It says a British flint. They're calling it a British flint just because it looks like something they found in Europe. But they found this here. All right. Some more images. You guys can see. Some more artifacts in the museum. Yeah, I definitely didn't go to the museum. I don't remember, unless they didn't have it. It was a long time ago when I went, guys. I was still living in Boston. And I did head over there on my trip in the summer, I believe. Yeah, I don't remember going into a museum, so they might have not had that when I went. But here you go. This is different pictures of the site. All right. Great Ireland, Greater Ireland. It wasn't built by the Norsemen or Scandinavians or Eric the Red, as the guy told you in the book. It's a lot older than them. They never said they did build any of this stuff, So here's a clearing of the forest showing you. If you look a certain direction, you can see all the way. The sun points to it. And that clearing was pretty amazing. I was like, wow, this is really advanced. This is huge. Like, you had to remove mad trees and everything just to get the alignments so you can see the sun setting and all that. So this is one of the clearings, is what I'm saying. This was all forest, and they cleared it out just to do the solar alignments. Pretty amazing. Pretty amazing. Again, America's Stonehenge. They call it America's Stonehenge. This might be a lot older than Stonehenge, all right? And this is what I was saying. This might go more deeper. I believe it did, right? When I was there, I felt like I was on the rooftop of these structures. Like, it went further down. It might even be some caves under there or something, So here's a perfect example of what I'm talking about. So they had these rocks aligned into the clearings of the forest, so you can see the sunsets and the sunrises. Pretty cool. Here's an older picture. Yeah, that's what I remember when I went. I don't remember a museum, though. Maybe I'm just not remembering. So this is the astronomical chart. This is the clearance, the arrows of the clearance that I'm talking about. When you're standing in the middle, you can see every direction. It's pretty crazy. All right. Yes, a lot of good pictures here on this website. All right, some more. And they again don't know who built it or don't want to tell us who did. And again, they don't try to give credit to any ancient American. It's just a mystery, right? What does mystery mean? My story. Mystery, my story. They try to give us his story, not my story or mystery. Everything's a mystery. They prefer you to think everything's a mystery than actually knowing America's the true old world. Ancient Americans did this, and they brought this knowledge over to Europe. They did the same thing. They did it over there. This is a more archaic form of these things. Even the writing. All right, you guys see? Pretty big complex of ruins here in America's Stonehenge in Salem. Okay, there's a lot of good pictures here. A lot of good pictures. The sacrificial table. So this is what they're calling it. They don't know if it was a sacrificial table. You know, this is what them calling it at certain sites. Here's the sacrificial table. A llama. I don't know why they got a llama here. So here's a good one of the clearing. Right, they put the stone right in the middle so it can align. Pretty cool. This is what I was saying. Like when you stand in the middle, you see every direction. Like, wow, somebody actually did this. This is amazing. Ancient Americans, right? Supposed to just be savages here. Pretty cool pictures. Pretty cool pictures. Look at this one right here. Like a little road or path. Yeah, again, this is like up in the forest in New Hampshire. In Salem. Salem, yeah. So they have Salem, Massachusetts, where they had the witch trials, and then right on across. So basically, Salem is split into two. Half of it in Massachusetts, half of it in New Hampshire. All right, so you guys get an idea, right? You guys see this? So just one site. He went to numerous sites in New England. We're gonna go back to the book and just finish reading a little bit for the dismount. Okay? Again, I hope you guys enjoyed today's presentation. Look at that. And from the inside of these things, I felt like they went deeper down. I'm telling you guys, a lot of this on the bottom is not just rock, it's dirt, like filled in. You know, who knows? It might be wrong, it might be right. Alpaca. They didn't have alpacas there, definitely, when I went, so this is definitely probably a new thing. All right. You guys see, some of these things weigh so much you can't move it. How did these ancient people move it? How did they put the stone on top like that? Oh, it was probably there already. No, they wasn't. Somebody placed that there. Right? Look at that. Amazing. The clearing. There goes the alignment and the clearing of the forest. Yep. So if you're near this place, go check it out. You might be in Great Ireland. Great Ireland. So back in the book, The Ruins of Great Ireland and New England by William B. Gooden, where in preface 2 says these strange stone houses. And, you know, he's just talking here. Down here says, it is well known that outside of Red Indian archaeology and the remains these original inhabitants have left to us, there has hitherto come to light little or nothing which speaks of early European contact with our land, save that which the Spaniard left behind him after 1492. The suggestion we have made that there might be a possible contingency that these stone beehives might have been the work of a Celtic people. So he's admitting that he's theorizing. He doesn't know. Set up for a specific purpose, even before the arrival of the Northmen between AD 1001 and 1025, has met with only pity and criticism from those whom we thought would be only too happy to aid us to prove our contentions one way or the other. We now know that any attempt to create a new interest in antiquities, and particularly to ask for pecuniary aid, ran counterwise to those archaeologists who have fields of endeavor abroad and not at home in the United States or Canada, and needed such aid for their own researches in Europe, Asia, Central and South America, as well as aid for their museums with which they are directly connected. We do not write this except to tell the general public who are always interested in the past, historically speaking, just what we have been up against and why we have not progressed more rapidly towards a definite realization of what it all means. When these attempts were made to belittle, that is the word we think, the whole proposition from purely selfish motives, there had come to light only two definite sites where examples of this form of stonework were known to exist. On these two, the critics formed their destructive opinions and put such opinions into print. Since that day, we have located 7 or more sites distant from the others, which were beyond question built by the same sort of people, who do not fit into any niche within our own colonial archaeological history, all built in exactly the same or relative fashion. Furthermore, we have examined many curious stone hideouts called to our attention by others who had various ideas concerning them. For the most part, these last secret places are west of the original line, north and south, where we have already located the first examples called to our attention some 5 years ago. While the former are unmortared, cave-like structures, most of them found on the line of the ancient Indian path from the forks of the Hudson to Boston Bay, termed the Mohawk Trail, the evidence is that they were built from east to west and not from the line of the Hudson River eastward. So let's be logical here, right? What is he saying? He's saying that they're flying most of these places on Indian paths. So who built them then if they're found on the Indian paths? What happens to people's logic that gets so biased into trying to prove their theory that they're not looking at the obvious, right? That they were refugee stations seems a reasonable assumption. Curiously enough, they have been found near colonial framed early dwellings used as garrison houses by the first settlers on the established Indian trail above mentioned. The inference being that these secret hideouts outdated the colonial settlements. There is no indication of when they were built in themselves, nor is there any reference to them in any early or local colonial records as far as we know. So he's admitting they don't know how old this is. So why are you saying people from Ireland came here and built them and then they disappeared? What if it's much older than them? And then these people went over there to Ireland and started building the same things over there. From the point of view of their construction, there seems to be little similarity to the examples found on the North and South Great Indian Trail from Kingdom of Passaconaway, the chief Sakim of the Merrimack River territory down as far as the Webster Lake on the Connecticut border, in which we are more particularly interested. One thing is certainly true, and that is that all such individual sites follow these two known Indian paths, even if widely separated from one the other, all right? They're all along Indian paths. So who built them if they're in the Indian paths? All right, so let's look at this map right here real quick. Let me just zoom out so you guys can get a good view of it. So these are some of the sites, right? Different sites. So we got all the way up New Hampshire, Maine. So South Berwick, Portsmouth, Hampton, Raymond, Kingston, North Salem, and Massachusetts, Byfield, North Andover, Lowell, Westford, Leominster, Harvard, Weston, and Boston, even in Boston City, Worcester, Hopkinton, Upton, Mills, Medway, Hopedale, Mendon, Webster. Then in Rhode Island, we got some. The Dighton, look, Dighton, Mass, where they found the Dighton Rock. Remember the inscriptions on Dighton Rock? In Plymouth, and Bourne, and Martha's Vineyard. It says here diagrams of Southeast New England, right? And then right here it says, just zoom in a little bit, sites on the map. There are in all so far found 15 sites. Thus we shall treat them in turn, for they are all more or less different from one another. So you got Upton, Mass, Hopkinton, North Salem, Kingston, right? That's the ones we just saw on the map, all right? And then it says, when we say they are different, we mean they are divided into certain distinct types of buildings. All right, let me just zoom in again a little bit. All of stone, all unmortared. On the other hand, there is no uniformity in their dimensional character. No amount of excavation will give us the true picture. With each chapter covering a particular site, photographs of that site are provided before or after any research work was done there. There being an abundance of photographs, choice may be made to best suit the subject and to save expense of publication. Black and white drawings by Professor Vincent F. Fagan of Notre Dame University, Indiana, are also to be shown, illustrating our conception of how some of the larger buildings were constructed and to explain the limitation met with in the size of these huge blocks of stones. Among the photographs are similar sites outside of New England and Labrador, Greenland, Ireland, and Europe. Further, we present a general map of these sites showing the extent of the area called Great Ireland. Naturally, there are many problems which have arisen to which there is no definite answer. Yet in the main, we present certain solutions to the more outstanding of such questions, which we think are reasonable. All right, so he's going to literally theorize. As Professor Fagan points out, the widespread ruins of Great Ireland, with the distance involved, brings us to one conclusion. Taking the site at North Salem, at the principal center around which the general plan was evolved, we have a religious community operating on the self-same plan as that of the Kuldee missionaries to Pictland, whether from Ireland, Iona, or any of the early monasteries in Scotland, all right? Just like the ones over there, right? Where the Picts from? Where these Kuldees or Chaldees, remember, these were sons of Arphaxad, the same line as Eber. Arphaxad was the son of Shem. Remember my video, Ireland, Ur of the Chaldees, right? As we see this plan, the first of the Kuldees under their app came from Iceland to Greenland to Sculpin Island of Labrador, and so finally down the coast of Nova Scotia and Maine until they reached the Penobscot River. So again, what if he's seen it in reverse? Follow that same path in reverse. It would seem as if they kept on until they reached either the Piscataqua River or the mouth of the Merrimack, that is, entered the Great Bay or went up the Merrimack until they reached the Spigot River and beyond. Having, let us say, established a site for their app, they sooner or later, always keeping well inland, spread along the main Indian highways known today as Number 1 into Maine and the Connecticut Path to Upton, Hopkinton, and the Wampanoag country, following also the Great Trail between Danville and Concord, New Hampshire, and so westward to Acworth, New Hampshire. From North Salem, they planted a missionary cell at Kinston and a mission at West Raymond, from which area, at the headwaters of the Lamprey and Exeter rivers, they turned east to the Salmon Falls River and South Berwick to build a mission there. To the west, out of Boston Bay, they followed Number 2 to the Leominster, Knowtown, Harvard, and Bolton. Whether these last two were missions, it is hard to say, but there are indications of their being on their guard at all times. All right, and we're gonna end it here, guys. Just for the dismount, again, I know this was, I dropped a lot of information, so we want to make these videos viewable. We don't want to make them too long because people won't sit through them, guys. I know. But I hope you enjoyed today's reading and presentation, and you get the idea of what I'm trying to go with this. You know, America is a true old world. There's so much correlation and proof. If you've been with me in this journey the last 7 to 8 years, over 950 videos, you just start seeing the bigger picture. Apart from just reading these specific books where these authors have their theories, right? But it's still a lot of drop here. We got to pull out the babies and we got to dodge the hijack. All right. Again, they're seeing it in reverse. Yeah, this is Greater Ireland or Great Ireland. And a lot of those ancient Irish came from the Americas, ancient Americans. Okay. All right. So we're going to end it there. This is to be continued. We're not done probably reading this book. Probably going to keep talking about more correlation when it comes to Celtic people over here. We got a lot of books we're going to get into. I just wanted to drop this first and put this idea out there first, letting you know that if anybody, again, crossed the Atlantic, if anybody was the first to cross the Atlantic, it had to have been American Indians. Don't forget that. Much love and respect. Pura vida, mi gente. Wow.